Alrighty, I will call this meeting to order. I know we've got some technical issues with the mic at the podium there, but which I think we're working on, but we're going to get started anyways. Under the approval of the agenda, there's been a few emails that are going around regarding the pergola, so I understand there's going to be some discussion about that under 2.4. If there are no other additions to the agenda, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. First item under new business is review of the 2014 financial plan, actual results compared to budget. Our Director of Finance.
Okay, and I'm going to stand if is this going to work? Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, well, it's been a long day and I'd sooner stand. So, anyways, first of all, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And also, I would like to thank the finance staff. It's been very busy putting it together, but we only put the budget together. And we couldn't do it without the input from all of the managers who are here tonight. And I know that they've also been working very hard on workbooks, and we had a very interesting staff meeting last week when we went through a couple of the items that we're going to be discussing this evening. So the budget this year has been a bit of a challenge, I have to say. Those of us who are putting it together were not here working with the new software last year, and Jen was on mat leave, and I'm here in an acting capacity. And we have big thanks to give to Shireen, who has been stepped up and acted as our IT coordinator and helped us out with this software. Because last year when your budget was done, you did have the consultant, Clive Freundlich. It's his product, and he was here, and he spent a considerable amount of time with staff. I think the amount we have invested in this product is between $50,000 and $60,000. And when I met with him, he had initially wanted me to sign up for his services basically on a full-time basis for this year. And I said, well, A, we can't afford that. And B, you know, we do want to take some ownership of our own budget software. And so I'm not prepared to just throw it aside. I realize as we've worked our way through this, and it's taken much longer than we would like, but there have been some problems when we go to roll over last year's budget workbooks into this year's. There was some formula problems, there were some broken links, and that's why in good conscience we're a little bit late getting started, because I don't like to bring things forward unless we've had 2 or 3 and 4 sets of eyes look things over and make sure we've caught all the things that need to be caught. So we've only had about 3 days of Clive's time, and that was just to kind of help us do some basic troubleshooting. So with that in mind, that sort of frames a bit of a difficult start, and I will go through a few of the things that are challenges. But before we get there, I just want to make sure that everyone knows the role. So right now we're going to be doing a review of actual versus budget, and I think this is very important because so often when we get into budget discussions, all we talk about is theory, which is, well, what we might be spending or what is the money that might be coming in. And really what I like to make sure that we focus on is the reality check, which is what this is tonight, is how did we really do in 2014 versus what we planned on doing, because that often will influence the 2015 budget going forward, or I would hope that it does. So that's why we're starting off with that this evening. I'm going to let my deputy, Jen Hepting, start off with that, with some of the highlights. And Shireen, if you can just project up this is the first item on your agenda. And Jen is going to be focusing on the first couple pages, which is the summary sheets of actual versus budget. Now, we did play with this to try to blow it up a bit because I realize it's hard to see. So it's good that you have your handouts there. And Jen, if you're ready, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so page 3 through 17 of your agenda package, that's the financial plan budget versus actual. And the first 2 pages is your revenue and additions summary, and then page 4 of 25 is your expenses and deductions summary for the 2014 year. So I'll just start a high-level review really there, and then if anyone has any more specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them. So if you look to the bottom of page 4 of 25, we are anticipating a surplus of approximately $700,000. And now that is simply the total actual revenues and additions of $18.9 million, less the actual expenses and deductions of approximately $18 million. That results in a net figure of $919,000, and then we adjust for any contributions that are made directly to our reserve funds to analyze whether or not we have a surplus in our general and our sewer funds. So we are looking at a cash surplus of approximately $700,000. I say cash, we haven't yet run our amortization, but that's a non-cash expense. So maybe just turn to the revenue and additions, and I'll just go through and highlight explanations for some of the larger swings there. So if we look to the taxation revenue, we actually realized $150,000 more in federal PILT taxation than we were expecting, and we have transferred that balance to our future operating expenditure reserve fund. So that has been earmarked for use in the future. And if we look to the user charges, again, we realized approximately $200,000 in additional revenues over what we had budgeted, primarily the result of a couple significant rezoning and subdivisions in the city in 2014, as well as approximately $60,000 in additional sewer user fee revenues. Moving down the list, conditional government transfers. You'll see that we budgeted $2.6 million and we realized just under $500,000. Now, the primary reason for that was twofold. We had a budgeted gas tax transfer of $1.3 million, but the projects and the capital acquisitions that transfer related to, we only actually spent about $180,000. So that budgeted gas tax just remains deferred, and it's a funding source to consider in the 2015 and future financial plans. And the other reason is we also had a budgeted conditional grant related to the Solar Colwood program of $1.1 million. And again, we actually claimed approximately $200,000 to date in the 2014 year. So those two reasons there are the real reason for the conditional government transfers coming in substantially under budget. And then looking to developer contributions, those came in just slightly over budget, and those are primarily amenity and affordable housing contributions directly to our reserve funds. And so if we move down and we look at the additions detail, again, the transfers from reserve funds, similar with the conditional government transfers, we are substantially under budget, and the primary reason is that represented the funding source for a number of special project and capital acquisitions, and we just didn't do that work in 2014. And so moving on to the next page, page 4 of 25, to look through the expense and deduction summary. There were a few functions where we did have some swings from budget to actual. Starting with general government, you'll see that the actual expenditures came in approximately $750,000 under budget. Again, this relates to the Solar Colwood program. We had a budget of $1.1 million, and actual expenditures were closer to $300,000. And so that accounts for about $850,000 difference, and then that was offset by some unbudgeted salaries and benefits relating to two new positions in the 2014 financial plan, being the communication manager and our auxiliary IT manager. So that used up a bit of the excess budget there. Moving down into protective services. Again, we came in approximately $200,000 under budget there. That primarily related to an $85,000, coming in $85,000 under budget with the building inspection, salaries, and office expenses, as well as coming in approximately $35,000 under budget on the RCMP policing contract. And also the fire protection budget, we came in approximately $80,000 under budget, primarily related to office training and insurance expenses. And if we look to the next line item, engineering and transportation services, we appear to come in under budget $485,000. Now, the majority of this variance is explained by $225,000 in special projects that we didn't do in 2014. And we will get into that later in the agenda when we talk about what special projects we're proposing to bring forward in 2015. As well, we're currently showing $150,000 in our major roads repairs budget, unspent at year end, and that will be transferred to a reserve fund. Also, our contingency wasn't spent, as well as a minor amount in membership and training line items. Looking to environmental development, which is representative of our planning services. We came in approximately $210,000 under budget, and again, that entire variance relates to special project work that was not done in 2014. Moving down to the utility and enterprise services, or the sewer, we came in approximately $275,000 under budget. The majority of that relates to unspent legal and contingency funding, as well as that variance will change. We do have a salary transfer that we haven't yet booked as part of our year-end accounting. If we move down into deductions, this is where we'll see the acquisition of the capital assets for 2014. And approximately 80% of our tangible capital asset budget was unspent. And again, we'll talk to that later in the agenda when we talk about what acquisitions and capital projects we are proposing to move forward to 2015 and future years. And the $1 million transfer to reserve funds, that primarily relates to the excess PILT revenue that I mentioned earlier, some unspent taxation that was funding specific special projects and specific capital projects. That's being transferred to reserves and will be a funding source for what we are proposing to bring forward, as well as some reserve fund transfers that were funded via taxation. So we had a $50,000 contribution to our new fire hall reserve fund. Our infrastructure deficit reserve fund saw another $50,000 contribution. And we'd also budgeted and funded a $175,000 contribution to the capital project reserve fund. So those explanations that I just went through there, that really explains how we've got to this $700,000 surplus that we're expecting. Now, we haven't gone through all the year-end accounting, so that figure could change somewhat, but it is something to keep in mind because essentially that does represent another source of funding. Currently, it is sitting in the city's accumulated surplus, but portions will be portioned off to specific reserve funds depending on what was the cause of that surplus. And if anyone has specific questions over any other aspect of the revenues or expenses.
Great. So I'll just open it up to the public first to see if they have any questions of the director and deputy director so far. No? So we'll bring it back to a committee. Mayor Hamilton, you had a question?
Yes. Jen, on the expenses on the top side there's a small amount in environment health services. And then there's another amount in recreation, parks, and culture. Can you speak to what made those numbers like they are?
So you're first referring to the $220,000 in environmental health services?
Yes.
Okay. If you scroll down to page Page 11 of 15, which is page 13 of your agenda package.
11. Okay.
So you can see the environmental health services is made up of a variety of functions the city performs. Garbage collection being the largest line item there. Spring cleanup, and that's garbage collection within the city parks and trails and that sort of thing. Spring cleanup, windstorm debris, the branch drop-off program, the crossing guards, the supplemental funding that the city provides to the school board, and then as well as the health and welfare services that our occupational health and safety advisor provides to city staff.
So to note in that section, garbage collection and branch drop-off were the two that were probably the most significant against what was budgeted and what was the actuals.
That's correct.
So we'll be doing a better job on estimating for next year. And the other one in Parks, Rec, and Culture?
And
$58,000 under budget, like it was over budget, overspent.
okay, so moving down to page 15 of your agenda package. Okay, the West Shore Parks and Recreation line item. You see there where the actual is 1.2 million versus the budget of 1.1 million. The contribution that the city funded through the Community Amenities Reserve Fund, the $150,000 contribution, that is sitting within that line item because it was an expense, it wasn't a capital, but we had budgeted for it within the capital fund. So if the budget reallocation had been made, you actually wouldn't see a deficit within this function. There would have been a nominal surplus. And that's the primary reason for that overall $58,000 deficit there.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Martin, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. I actually have several. Line item transfer to reserve funds. We transferred $1 million. It was budgeted for $1.7 million. And we have a $700,000 surplus. So why are we not actually meeting our reserves of actually fulfilling that 1.7 million?
And there's a good chance that we will. We typically don't do any final reserve fund transfers until we're much closer to our year end, until we have all our final adjusting journal entries booked. And at this point, we haven't yet formalized our debt analysis. As well as the analysis on an individual fund basis, so looking at the sewer operating fund versus the general operating fund. And also to complicate matters, a portion of the budget in the 2014 financial plan, a portion of the budget of the contribution to reserves was simply funded through a contribution from reserves. So we weren't funding a portion of the budgeted contribution externally. We were simply moving it from above the line and below the line.
I guess I just want, I feel a little uncomfortable when we say we have an anticipated budget surplus when we actually haven't fulfilled our requirements for the reserve funds, because I would think that would be a priority, that we would want to make sure that the reserve funds are actually being fulfilled.
Yeah, and once we know where our surplus is, there are specific components of that surplus that go to respective reserve funds. For example, any major road repairs unspent budget, that goes towards the future operating expenditure reserve fund. If we have any gain or loss on sale of assets, so we did realize a small gain on a disposal of one or two items of the fleet, that'll go towards the general or the sewer fleet reserve fund. But like I just mentioned, a portion of that budgeted transfer to your reserves was funded from your reserves.
Right. Well, it's just because I look at 2013 and I see that we didn't fully fund, even though we budgeted, we were short close to $200,000 on 2013, and I would hope that we would get to a position that we're fully funding when we are putting money away into reserves, that we're actually funding that 100%. So that was my first question. The second question is, again, we're looking at close to $5 million worth of unspent projects through the acquisition of capital assets through sewer fund and general fund, and I'm still a little confused on why that was not spent. That was not spent because we didn't have the time, or that we did not receive the funding sources that we were expecting to receive that.
Director of Engineering?
I should probably answer that, as most of that falls under my bailiwick. So we had budgeted, I believe we had the full 2.3 million budgeted for central sewers, and that wasn't started that year because sewage treatment took up the time. In 2014, we had budgeted to spend all the gas tax because we thought it had to be spent there. And then it turned out that they were extending the deadline, so it doesn't have to be spent there in that year. And you'll see that having recognized how much we can actually get done, the gas tax projects are now split between 2015, 2016, and beyond, in recognition of, when you look at Kelly Road, having gone through the public process, we then had to completely change the basis for the estimate to find out whether what the public wanted was even feasible, and it just adds time. It's not simply adding man hours; it's adding time, delaying everything.
Time?
Yeah. So I think we've got a much better budget arrangement this year, where we're not trying to spend everything in 1 year.
Right. So, sorry. So I'm being dense. So the question is, or excuse me, what I'm trying to understand is, so we just didn't have the time to do this, or did we not have it sounds like we had the funding in place through the gas tax, but we just ran out of time to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, carry on, please. Or was that it for 2.1?
That was pretty well it.
Excellent.
For 2.1.
Excellent. Do we need a motion to approve the report, Director of Finance or Director of Administration, or just carry on? Do we need
Director
a
of
motion?
Administration? Oh,
Either or.
certainly receive it, yeah.
Okay.
Just before we do, may I ask one final question?
One final
Thank you.
question, and then you're going to make the motion.
And then I'll make the motion as well. Do we know what our surplus deficit was for 2013 and 2012? And I realize that I'm popping that question up, so if you don't have it in front of you, that's fine.
Don't have it readily available, but I can bring it back next week.
Thank you. I will make a motion to receive.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 2.2. Looking forward to the 2015-19 financial.
Well, we hope we're looking forward to it, yeah. I'd be looking forward to a mic that I could hold up. I just think better when I'm pacing around here, so, if I start nodding off, give me a little kick here. So I'm hoping that you've had a chance to look through not just the summary sheets, but some of those detailed pages. There's going to be a quiz, actually, because I want to know what you've learned from that, because that actually is going to inform some of the things that we're going to be talking about going forward. So I wanted to just give you a heads up on a few things, because as I was looking through those detailed reports this evening, there's a few things that it's sort of a good news, bad news thing, and it's always nice if I could come to you and say, I have buckets of money under my desk to balance the budget with, and, we have all kinds of new revenue sources, but of course that's never the case. So one win that we have on the horizon this year is additional money in our 1% utility tax revenue line, and this is going to be from Fortis BC, and this is for the pipelines, the gas lines that go through Colwood, and that's a net gain of about $60,000 there. So this is additional money. We're happy to see that. And a couple of general numbers I want you to keep in mind. This is where the quiz comes in. I'll check to see if you've remembered. 1% tax increase gives us about, anybody know? $120,000, okay? That's an important figure to keep in mind. So that when I say we've got an extra $60,000, well, that's a half a percentage point right there for taxes, right? Just to kind of get it down into basic budget terms. Our casino revenue, on the other hand, which is interesting, I was looking at that, is it's actually gone down a bit. So this year we're looking at dropping the budget to say 300,000 from 340,000. So that's sort of in the loss column, just to give you a few ideas of how we've been going through this. One area we were concerned about on the revenue side going forward was something called small community and traffic fine grants, because the actual program has been discontinued. But through the astute investigation of our corporate officer here, she has got some secret sources, and they tell me that when the throne speeches come down and I have to go online and check, we will be continuing to receive those traffic fine monies and those small community grants. And that's really important. That's $150,000 to $200,000 per year. And we get them because we do spend in the neighborhood of $2.4 million per year on police protective services. And so it's nice to get a little bit of money back through the form of the rebates on the traffic fine monies. So that was good news, because I was actually quite concerned if that area had been discontinued. That was looking like a 2 to 3%, 2% tax increase for sure, if that had been gone away. So a couple of other things that are a bit problematic, and you have heard me talk about them, I'm hoping we'll have a resolution shortly, is the Colwood Corners, also known as the Capital City properties, which, as most people know, have been bought by Ani, who paid $17.5 million for it, and an additional $8 million to the creditors, which could give us a possible purchase price of $25 million, depending on who you're talking to, how that's valued. Right now, there's a collection of properties there, and they're valued on BC Assessment's database at $38 million. And this is under review right now. And I actually have just commissioned an independent appraiser to get us an appraisal to support a higher valuation as best we can, because at the end of the day, we could be looking at a hit to our tax revenue of between $200,000 and $400,000, depending on which way the appeal goes. They're also looking to reduce the classes from a lot of Class 6 property to Class 1. That's significant because the tax multiplier on Class 6 properties is at 4.0. So for every dollar of assessed value we lose for business taxes, that's $4 in residential terms, okay, because of the multiplier. We will know by March 15th the result of that appeal. We will be booking for 2014 a potential loss there, and again, the auditors are on site here March 23rd, so we'll wait till we get the results of the appeal to see how much of a potential loss that we're looking at on that property. That is a concern. Secondly, in 2015, the new owners, Ani, have also appealed. So in other words, we've got two appeals going on, 2014 and 2015. And so we'll also have to look at a revenue reduction for 2015 as well. And I'm hoping going forward that Ani will then have proceeded to add some improvements to that property, and we will in the end recover that money, but it's difficult. It's a bit of a hurdle in the short term. I'll just pause there for a minute because that's a fair bit of information I just imparted. Is there any questions on that?
So we'll go to the public first. Seeing none. Committee, Mayor Hamilton.
Just going on that, so we've collected the taxes on the property. We're up to date on that, but we're holding that in an account should we have.
We may have to refund a portion of that
so
pending the result of the appeal. So we will be
no-
putting that in a contingency, Jen, I believe at year end. Yeah.
Yeah, so the bigger impact will be 2015.
In
if they are
2015,
successful.
I will be looking at reducing our projected revenue by the amount of that. I haven't taken a wild guess yet because it is wild until I know which way the assessment review panel will rule on this.
Perfect.
And there's two items at play. One is the total dollar value. Two is the classification change.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
So now that I've depressed you with that bit of bad news, let's try and find something positive here. So it's sort of a mixed blessing, but it should put some money in our coffers. The other topic, I've been on board here with you for less than 6 months. Right now it seems a bit longer than that because we've been awfully busy, but I'm trying very hard to get up to speed on a number of very large files. Another very large file is your PILTs. This is the monies that you collect in lieu of taxes. And I had a look at it today before I spoke to you, and do you know that 10% of your total revenue is generated by PILTs? So that's due to the large DND presence in Colwood. So that's a lot of money. But the good news is one of the first folks I met with was BC Assessment, because if they're doing a good job in communicating any changes in assessment rules to the federal government, that makes it a lot easier for us to collect the full amount of our PILTs. And I'm very pleased to see that they have a new deputy assessor in the last 2 years who has forged very positive relationships with the federal government so that there is no more surprises in how they assess properties, whether it's waterfront properties, whether it's DND housing, whether it's vacant property. There's been we have 6 main properties that we have under appeal right now. We've actually boiled the list down to 6. And the total value that we've invoiced the federal government for, but we have not been able to collect due to these sudden surprising changes in how BC Assessment had been valuing those properties, and the Fed saying no, we won't pay. 1.5 million is what's at stake. I don't have any best guesses, but I have again engaged the services of an independent appraiser. I believe this is money well spent if we can get a percentage back. Now the good news on this is that Esquimalt has paved the way for us somewhat in that they have been successful fairly recently in a number of their appeals. And they, first of all, have to sit down and reach some sort of resolution at a very formal hearing in terms of what properties they agree were assessed in error and the federal government did not pay, and they've since said, okay, we will retract that position. So those precedents have been set, which is very helpful to us. So even if we could get 20 to 30% of the 1.5 million that's outstanding, that would be extremely helpful, as I've said to you before, to offset the Colwood Corners potential liability. Okay, so those are big ticket items, and I'm not budgeting for PILT money to come in. I have to do this conservatively, but just so you're aware of what's the backstory and how I'm trying to patch up a few of those budget holes, we'll call them. Okay, now.
Councillor Day just had a quick question.
Yeah, just on the hearing that's set on PILT for Esquimalt, I just wondered if anybody from Colwood would be there to learn anything, or if there would be anything to be gained from being in attendance.
I'm not sure if that's open to the public. Those hearings have already been held, and the appraiser that we're working with is the same one that worked for Esquimalt. So I'm working with him in order to make sure I've got the best up-to-date information I can get.
Thank you. Mayor Hamilton?
I was just working with them today because obviously the pressure of budget is demanding all of our time right now, but I am still pushing hard to make sure the appraiser gets his report filed, which I learned he hadn't, so I've been working on that today to make sure that those reappraisals are done, and we will probably be setting the hearing for closer to May or June when we're through the bulk of budget, financial year end, and property tax notice preparation.
Thank you.
Okay, so I got a couple more things to say about the going forwards. So that was on the revenue side. Now I have talked to you briefly about the approach I'm looking at using. So our next budget meeting, we did have to defer. We were scheduled to have one on Wednesday, and due to the workload pressures and some of the problems we've had with the program, I apologize, but we've had to defer it a week to ensure that we've got the time to triple check everything. But some of the things that we're going to be talking about there, are the tax rates. So I've pulled some numbers out of the air, and we will have you, I'm sure, come in with some very thoughtful suggestions as to where you would like the bottom line to be. But I had to look at some type of tax increase. Now, I've looked at our assessed values at the end of the year compared to last year. Our total tax base is relatively stable. There hasn't been any huge gains or losses apart from the Capital City appeal. And that's good. There's been a bit of a small non-market change, and I think most of you who are at the table and have been here for a while know that when we have new construction, that drives non-market change. And I realize I'm speaking to a bit of a mixed audience in terms of your experience with budgets and with BC assessment, so if I'm over-explaining, stop me, or if you need more detail, weigh in, okay? But I will cover that in more, there's an echo here, isn't there? I will cover that in more detail at a future meeting, but what I wanted to say is the basic tax base is stable. We did have BC Assessment come and do a presentation to our January Finance and Admin Committee meeting, and I think most of you were there, and that was my thinking, that you would get a bit of a backgrounder and why that's so important. Now, having said that, tax rates, to me they're made up of a number of different things. One of them right now, we're looking at sort of a basic 2% minimum in terms of CPI. So, for instance, wages and benefits make up almost 50% of our budget if we don't take special projects and additional capital assets into consideration. So 50% of your budget, close to $8 million, wages and benefits. And we're looking at anywhere between 2-3% increase. We do have occasionally staff come forward and look for reclassification in their wage rates. That will drive an increase over and above the contractual amount, which was running at about 2%. Fire department has a little bit different contract, and again, there may be some variations there in those increases. So right off the bat, for setting tax rates, I believe you need 2% just to cover the cost going up for all the things that we need to spend. Now, on top of all that, Colwood does have a significant infrastructure deficit, no different than many other BC communities, in that our roads, our sewers, our different infrastructure, our buildings, we're not necessarily fully funding them in terms of the amortization expense every year. So I'm suggesting that you look at, we do have an established infrastructure reserve fund, and I'm looking at suggesting you put, say, a 1% tax increase into that to help pay for things like a sewer treatment plant going forward. And some of your other major expenses here are your sewer debt. And on top of all that, in terms of some of the uncontrolled expenses, and we'll get to that, you might want to look at a little bit more of an increase. So when we get into our budget workbooks next Wednesday, you'll see that I've built some different numbers in there, and I know that you'll have lots to say about that, but we did start with some increases in there, starting at 4.9% for this year. So that's 2 plus 1 plus 1.9 for some of the increases. And I'm going to tell you about a few things that were kind of nasty surprises that we didn't know about. So we started at 4.9 for 2015, 3.9 for 2016, and 3.5% for 2017, and 3% for 2018 and 2019. Don't worry about a quiz on that one. You'll be getting that in your workbook next week. However, the budget software program we're working with, we noticed that we didn't have funding available for some of the new positions. Those of you who were here last year will recall a document called Payroll Supplementals. The Payroll Supplementals were to seek funding, and first of all, approval by council and funding. Do you want me to?
No, there's just a question as to whether we had that information that's on the screen. The answer is no, right?
We, in terms of the tax increases?
No, that what is on the screen yet? We haven't got it in our package, right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No. Good to know you passed the homework quiz. You've been checking and it wasn't in your package. Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting. Okay, we'll try this. Is that any better? Okay. So somewhere in here, make sure you notice if I say some good news, because I'm feeling like a little bit of bad news here, and I do apologize for that, but I'm here to report the facts. I didn't make them, okay? So we noticed that there was a number of these positions, and in this budget software, the total figure for these positions, including benefits, was around $200,000. There was no linking the cost of those new positions and budgets to anywhere in the actual budget. So you approved them and they were not funded. So we have some fantasy people amongst us this evening One of them is Sandra. So her position was approved. She's been working diligently, and the budget that was approved for that position did not make it in the budget. There was a half-time amount approved for an IT position that did not make it in the budget. There was a new watch clerk approved for the RCMP that didn't make it in the position, into the budget, sorry. And there was also another position that was approved for engineering, but I don't believe it was filled, but that was not in the budget. So there was about $180,000 in total salaries approved, and benefits running at around 25% or so, actually 31. So we have a shortfall before we even started the budget, which is why I've been working some rather long hours trying to find some good news out of all this to see where we might have saved some money instead of not including it in the budget. So let's just say we've got a $200,000 problem right there. And unfortunately, Fire Chief Carey was also singled out for special attention, and it wasn't good. So that when the benefits were calculated for the fire department, the superannuation portion for our firefighters is particularly expensive, given the fact that they are eligible to retire sooner and put their lives at risk for us, of course. So their benefit, the cost of superannuation for our firefighters is 17% of their salaries. And for the regular staff that work inside in City Hall, it's 10%. So imagine there was a bit of a hit on his budget when the superannuation was essentially missed for the fire department due to a glitch in the computer program. It looks like a formula got overwritten, and there was about a $200,000 hit there to the fire department that was not included. And just one more I'm just little Miss Susie Sunshine, and I'm usually a fairly happy person, folks, but the other thing that was not in the budget was WCB coverage. So in other words, we pay a certain percentage on gross wages. For 2014, your WCB premium expense was 1.86%. That was not included. That was $100,000 that was not in the budget. Now, unfortunately, I think we'll have to look at a few of our safety practices. I see our premium has gone up to 2.31% this year. That'll cost us $132,000. So that's $500,000 of things that weren't in the budget last year that we're going to have to find. So we're going to get really busy here next week when we go through these. And what we'll be providing you with is budget workbooks that include a summary by department of actual versus budget for last year, and then the 5-year projections going forward. And I believe last year you were I actually have a question for you now. In your budget workbooks last year, you were actually given copies of all the detailed workbooks. Did you actually go through all of those workbooks? Yeah? Okay. I just was wondering what the expectation was, how much detail you wanted to go through, because we will come back with some recommendations on some of that. Okay, so I'm depressing myself. That's enough of that. So we have done a lot of work. We do have to, as Jen said, finalize our analysis on the sewer account. Is this still working? Can't hear. No? Yes? Oh, okay. We do need to finalize our debt analysis and our sewer budget, which is a big ticket item, before we can get to the magic bottom line that I know you're all keen on, which is revenues minus expenses and looking at how we're going to restock our reserves. And I'll talk a little bit at the close of the meeting in terms of my piggy bank approach, we'll call it, in the need to ensure that we are restocking our reserves in a planned and thoughtful manner so that when unexpected expenses pop up, which they always do, that we've got the money for that. There's no happy medium how close you get here. Okay, so that I think is more than enough. Everybody wants to go hide under their desk now. That's item 2.2.
Thank you, Andrea. We appreciate the facts, ma'am, and you still got your glow, so don't worry. It has not diminished whatsoever. So we will see if there's any questions from the audience on 2.2 before we move on. Seeing none. Committee, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. So if we go back to the anticipated surplus of $713,000, does that include the $500,000 unfunded salaries? That
Yes, so that's the good news.
does. Okay, so
In spite of that, we managed to pull off a surplus. I'm very proud of you guys.
And I will reiterate, that's the cash surplus. We still haven't run amortization expense for the year. But amortization is a non-cash item.
So the 2014 actuals that we're looking at included the tabs that were not originally working?
Those actuals include all actual expenses.
Okay.
A couple of the payroll supplementals that were missed in the budget, like Andrea said, we didn't fill those positions, so we didn't have any actual expenses there.
Okay. Thank you.
So overall, some of our departments did quite well. Considering that they were shorted, they still came in at budget or a little bit under. Okay? So we'll get into that next week. I know you're keen.
We're keen. Okay, so let's go on to 2.3, Andrea, special projects with
All right.
resources.
So now this is where we're going to do a little more participation instead of me doing all the talking. So I've decided my eyes are going after all these hours on my computer screen and that, so that's why you've got these big, maybe unwieldy pieces of paper, but hopefully we can all read them, okay? So special projects is up on deck, and I'll just give you a bit of an overview and explain what I kind of thought we could do in terms of going through these. So I've tried to give you a little bit of history of what happened last year. So at the very top, you'll see some columns, budget 2014. Special projects are things that were over and above your core budget. They're not necessarily capital. We budgeted to spend $621,000, and we managed to complete 30% of those projects at a total of $187,000. And it looks like we've got quite a bit planned, as you can see, for 2015, and the totals go across the top there. So over 5 years, at the very far right in green, there's a figure 1.576 million. That's the total amount of special projects. Again, the finance department does compile these things. We did have a staff meeting to review them. But beyond that, I think I would like to go through these section by section. You'll see they're organized by department. And I will let the managers speak to their projects. And perhaps, Mr. Chair, you might want to have questions like for each section pertaining to a department.
Great advice.
Does that sound like
Yep.
a plan?
Sounds a plan.
So having said that, I think I will toss the ball over to you, Pat. We have a number of admin projects there that you might want to speak to.
Thank you. Not sure if you can hear me here. I hope I don't go into a coughing fit here. So one of the first items that we have here has to do with the Heritage Archives, and we had $2,500 put into the budget. This was put in there in 2014, and it was intended to be phase 2 funding for a collection process for some cabinets and boxes for a lot of our archive material, as well as, I believe, a videoing project that the Heritage Commission had undertaken. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do a lot of that stuff that they were hoping to do in 2014, but still plan to do it in year 2015. So I'm not sure if the funds that weren't spent in 2014 can be carried over for the same project, or if new funding has to be put into place for that specific project. With respect to the and in 2016 there's an $8,000 budget amount, and that was for some outreach exhibits, collection and administrative expenses, but we've decided to keep that over into 2016. It was to come to 2015, but they know they can't achieve that this year.
Can I just put a comment in there? This is just a general comment. So for things that were approved last year and the funding was approved, we can carry that forward. So it's not like we're going to be taxing again. So if the funding source was from tax, we won't be taxing it a second time. We roll that into a reserve for future expenditures, and we draw that out to pay for the project that got rolled forward. Okay?
So, yeah, actually, I think you're going to ask the question I was going to ask, is how do we identify which is being carried over?
I do have a list. I'm sorry. When I produced these, we had a number of spreadsheets. The one I was going to give you showed the source of the funding, but it didn't show the 2014 performance, which I thought was important to your deliberations to see what had been planned for 2014. So like this first one is funded from tax. So that money that was raised last year from tax is in a reserve for future expenditure.
Then I guess perhaps as we're going through, maybe just make note that this will be funded from a carryover, and we can just put a little asterisk or something.
Same with the art project that's next. That was funded last year from tax.
Yes. My understanding is the $6,000 was funded in 2014, and they're asking for the $3,000, and this is seed funding to facilitate exploring the installation of a large art project on city or private lands. And it's additional support for materials to attract funding. Is that correct? The Deputy Director of Engineering can help us with that one.
Yeah, that's correct. Council members that were here in the previous council will recall this was to do with a large monolithic art structure by Andreas Kunert, who also did some work in View Royal on the Island Highway project there.
So on the item for the council chamber installation, in 2014 we had $11,690. In 2015, it looks like not all of the money was spent, and it's only budgeting $5,700 for the remaining works. Unfortunately, I'm getting completely lost in what work had to do with IT type technology and changes as opposed to the chamber, which was getting the room ready not only for that, but we had a lot of work that had to be done in the cement floors in order to put certain types of cabling in order to finish the IT work, and then hopefully bring the new carpeting in. So I'm a little bit lost on which project speaks to which item.
Perhaps I can help with that. The next tab we're going to get to is tangible capital assets. And the first item there is the carpet and the tile for City Hall. And there is money in there for 2015 specifically for the carpet.
So this is obviously all the internet technology and, okay, super, thank you.
That is reserved for future expenditures. It was probably carried from an earlier year.
Perfect. The item that we have here for the heritage artifact storage, the Heritage Commission did have $5,000 they were going to put in the 2015 budget in order to help us have a place to put a lot of the materials that we've been gathering and collecting that you can see in our hallways and on shelves and in the records room, and we're just a little bit desperate for proper storage, never mind the proper kind of heating and protection from moisture and things like that. We're going to leave the $5,000 over in 2016 so that we have 2015 to investigate more options that could be available to us for a more permanent answer to those storage issues. But for 2015, because we do have to address the need and still have to put this stuff somewhere, they were looking at getting an off-site storage unit where we could pay, I think it's approximately $200 a month plus taxes, and it would hold everything. If we can come up with a plan sooner than later, we'll do that, but we're just trying to budget 2015 for a place to have storage for all these artifacts and get our records room back. I can't really speak to the consultant organizational review. This is the service capacity review that was discussed in 2014, carried over into 2015. We're projecting the budget amount that was put in the RFP that went out last year and then was put on hold. And it's going to be a council decision whether or where we go with this particular topic.
So sometimes you'll see something, and I'll use the expression placeholder. In other words, we don't want this to get lost, so that council can either say yay or nay, we want it to go or not, or we want to, come up with some different figures perhaps. But it's in here more to make sure that it doesn't get missed in the discussion.
So we'll just finish off Pat's section, and then we'll go for questions.
Oh, I believe that's the last part that's mine. There's a number of things that are under communications which might be better for our communications manager to speak to, because she can tell you more of the detail that's very specific to each of the agenda items.
Great. Thanks, Pat. So what we'll do is we'll get questions for Pat, so we'll go to the audience first, see if they have any questions for the admin section. See none. Committee, Mayor Hamilton?
Maybe to the finance director. They... the $75,000 on the consultant organizational thing, was that not in the budget last year, and would it not show as a carryover as opposed to just brand new? Yes, no?
I can speak to that briefly. That wasn't specifically in the budget as a special project last year. When discussions started at council earlier this year, the proposed funding source had been the corporate professional fees budget for that amount. And I will just note, our Director of Administration was commenting on the council chamber installation, that $6,000 actual expenditure. The majority of that relates to this TV up here. And I believe the one in the back, and it may also include those mics.
Thank you. So we'll turn it over to the Manager of Communications.
Are you looking for anything from us? Is this just information tonight, or are we?
At this point, it is for information, but I think that you'll be able to make better decisions. I'm hoping that if you have questions about the projects, tonight's the night to get the background information. When we bring forward where we think we are in terms of, revenues versus expenses and what we can afford, then you can weigh in and, make motions and what have you. Is that clear?
Okay. So the first item in the communications section here is it regards events. So I guess the idea is that, and I should note too that $10,000 for community events was actually in the 2014 budget under the communications person. That's not showing up there, so it was approved last year. So the idea is just that community events and festivals play an important role in enhancing community well-being. Also, the potential for new investment grows when we invite people into our community and showcase what we have here. We've got tourists coming, businesses, vendors, promoters, and all kinds of other people coming. So it's quite important. And also acknowledging the fact that we have an amazing array of venues here in the city that we should really be playing a role in promoting. So when we talk about West Shore Parks and Recreation, Fort Rudd Hill, rural roads that we can use, our golf clubs, St. John the Baptist Church, our parks, there's a whole bunch of places we should be showcasing that we're not, and hosting some community events is a good way to do that. So that's one thing. The next thing is about public art projects, and this has been bumped into 2016 at this point. And the idea is just to have some small, visible signs that we are investing in our public realm. So the idea would be to look at getting some functional public art, maybe some interesting benches, maybe some interesting bike parking. This would be a placeholder for that kind of thing, so that we could do some one-off enhancements that would be really visible and community benefit. That's the idea there. The citizen survey we spoke about last year, and it was actually in the budget last year. Again, it doesn't show up here, I'm not sure why, but so we had a budget placeholder for that. We didn't get that going last year. I think this is vitally important for the city, so that we're hearing from the silent majority, so that it's not just the folks that regularly come to meetings or regularly email us, so that we're hearing what people's priorities are out there by a random survey that goes, there's a number of different ways to do it. We could be doing it in-house, or we could be using something like ISPIS Read to help us with that. So we've got a $3,000 placeholder there to consider implementing a citizen survey. The community profile is the next item, and that is part of the one of the implementation strategies of the economic development plan. So the idea would be to create a section of our website and some print materials that would be targeted at investors, showing them all that our city offers, highlighting our competitive advantage here in Colwood. It's kind of a critical tool to distinguish Colwood from other West Shore communities and build partner and investor confidence. So we would talk about our community, cultural, and historic assets, population, land, and growth statistics, current development projects we've got going, an inventory of available land and assets, and how to engage with the city, make it easy for people. So that's the kind of thing that community profile is talking about. The next one is about waterfront branding and promotion. And the idea behind this is that our waterfront is really our most unique feature, our most treasured asset. We brag about it on our website. We talk about it everywhere as our best thing. The problem is that it looks fairly uncared for, frankly, at this point. There are too many signs in a state of various disrepair. We need some standardization of the regulatory signage and directional signage down there. So that would be phase one, a bit of a cleanup down there. Secondary would be a welcome, some sort of welcome sign. We have a big empty sign there. So that would be the second thing. And then great potential there for interpretive signage, telling the story of Colwood, so that if you were on the lagoon and you looked across to Royal Roads University, you could learn about that. You could look down and be seeing the amazing biodiversity there and learning about that. Even looking forward to climate change and the effects that we're expecting there and how we're planning for that. So huge potential for just some very unobtrusive, fits in the environment, looks beautiful, informs people, enhances people's sense of place and community pride. It's something that I feel we need to be doing, if that's our point of pride in the city, to show just a little bit of care for it. The last one is regarding a community wellness initiative. The city had been approached by someone from PICE, Pacific Institute of Sport Excellence, with a proposal to work with Royal Roads University on some degree programs around community wellness, health promotion. So there's an opportunity there for Colwood to get involved in that project, looking to the future of potentially health and wellness facilities, education facilities in the city. And there's a lot of potential for that project to go to other communities if the city doesn't choose to take part in it at this time. So it's something I have more information on, and there's great opportunity to become a leader in community wellness and promoting health in our city, and there would be many advantages to taking that stance. Something for council to consider. And those are my pieces. Any questions?
Thank you, Sandra. Put it up to the public.
It's down. Do you want to come over?
He won't. Yeah.
Sorry, Judith.
Don't be shy. Judith Collington, 3338 Acemink. It's nice to be on this side of the table where I don't have to make the tough decisions, so I appreciate that. Thank you. A comment and a question. Comment on the Public Arts Project. Terrific initiative. I think that's lovely. I think we should see that matched by our businesses, at least on a one-to-one basis. And then the question through the chair, and I'm not sure whether that goes to the Director of Planning or the Communications Director, but in previous years, and I've got my Elsie hat on at the moment, in previous years, we know we've got sitting in the Public Works shed this big, beautiful piece of art that Butch Dick has done. We know we've got a sign that's ready to go in that empty space that's ready to go. But there's some relationship building that's happening with the First Nations, and I'm not sure where that's at. But for the purposes of this discussion, it's have we protected budget for that? Should we be able to go ahead this year and do that art installation, which really would be a lovely thing to achieve?
Great question. Ian, Director of Planning.
Great question. As we understand it, the situation with the First Nations interpretive material, the situation rests with resolution of some spiritual and ceremonial asks from the First Nations community. At this point, we are working with both the Songhees and the Esquimalt to align their interests in terms of what will happen there for them to be accepting of the interpretive material and the art in what they feel very strongly is a sacred spot, considering the archaeological remains that are in that area. We are going to be prompting them for an update, likely in the next couple weeks, but it is a slow process in terms of the spiritual needs making sure to be met. Thanks.
Andrew?
My understanding is that there isn't significant costs associated with installing them. The pieces have been constructed. It's just a matter of them being installed, which would likely be done through in-kind public works at time.
Is that any other questions from the public? No, seeing none. We'll come to committee. Councillor Day and Mayor Hamilton.
Just one thing that might be missing from the budget that would be helpful in moving that First Nations piece forward would be money to match possibly a UBCM grant from the Regional Community to Community Forum program. It could be as little as $5,000, which UBCM would then match to do some relationship building activities, and that's fairly open-ended to what would work with First Nations, but that would be one way that might facilitate moving forward with First Nations down at Esquimalt Lagoon with some of the great art that we already have.
So we don't lose that, Councillor Day. It might be worthwhile that we have a motion, perhaps, that would direct staff to investigate that grant.
I'd be happy to move that.
Okay.
That we investigate a UBCM C2C funding grant, that staff investigate and report back.
So, Ian, you had a comment or question?
I just wanted to make council aware that staff has investigated that as an option, and we are what we're thinking with the community forum is once the spiritual needs of the local First Nations have been met down at Lagoon, we would be moving towards applying for a community grant. And what we were thinking was that we would use our in-kind support of that event. That would be our contribution that would then be matched through the program, which is a normal way of approaching it.
Would we not have to include some sort of budgetary amount, though, in the budget in here for special projects then, just so we capture it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sorry, I was waiting to hear a seconder on that motion as well.
We don't need a seconder at committee.
Okay.
No. So perhaps the motion, well, we'll approve the motion anyways. Even though it's already done, but it's on the books. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried? And Director of Finance?
And if I could just comment on the funding source. So we will double check, Sandra, if any of those should have been carried forward. But right now, those are all coming from taxation, which is an important point. Now, one of the things that will be coming forward to Council, not next week, but the second week of March, we have a grant and aid session. And also a number of items where people are requesting grants from council. And one of those is the Chamber of Commerce. So last year you did earmark $19,000. And that's one of the staff recommendations that will be coming forward, which is relevant to this discussion, is perhaps reducing the amount of that contribution in order to fund some of these items. So you'll see when you get your detailed budget, we're looking at, we've put in a placeholder right now of $7,000 for the Chamber, and hoping the $12,000 reduction could go to some of these items a little bit.
Thank you. Mayor Hamilton?
And just actually a note to Mr. Borhill. Working with First Nations is always a challenge. I've spent a considerable amount of time trying to forge those friendships. And I know you have relied on a certain member of Songhees administration. But Ken is moving on to Nanaimo in the very near future, and so that liaison there, right at this point, will have been broken, and we'll need to forge a new person there. So just a heads up to you.
Thank you. So the next victim, please.
Is Building and Flow, if you'd like to use my mic. Okay.
We have an item here for City Hall seismic evaluation, and I've brought this forth this year so as we can have a professional engineer review the building to determine its resiliency in the event of an earthquake. The loss of our operations of this building would be quite upsetting, to say the least, and would create a lot of stress in our operations and our works with the public. The $10,500 will give us a review of the building from a seismic point of view, and they will use our evaluation approach very similar to that which is used by the school districts throughout the province. Included in that money is also a order of magnitude cost to bring the building into, and I say this carefully, to compliance with the building code. And by the order of magnitude, it'll say it could cost between X and Y to make this building seismically stable. Now, when we discuss in compliance with the building code, for existing buildings, it's generally recognized that buildings are brought to a level which is approximately 80% of the current building code. At 80% of the building code, the building has enough structural robustness to ensure that anybody inside the building can get out safely. There would be a very strong likelihood that the building will be damaged, quite possibly beyond immediate use. But it does ensure that the occupants of the building can safely evacuate. If directed by council, a person could ask our consultants to go to 100% code compliance, bearing in mind that the costing would rise exponentially, I suspect. I think it's important for council to receive this information and to analyze it and look at our long-term position in our community and our need to house our center of local government. Any questions, comments?
Did you want to? Is that your only one, Flo, or you've got?
No, I have another one.
Okay, so you can do that one too, and then once you're done, we'll open it up.
The next was digitizing microfiche, and this is a carryover from last year. Unfortunately, due to workloads, we never had delivered the microfiche to the consultant until the end of November. We sent over half the batch. We got it back in early January. The second half has gone out for scanning as we speak. In the first round of scanning, we did over 11,000 documents and plans that we had in microfiche, and we have a similar amount that'll be coming back. So, because of the nature of the billing for this project and the work that carried over into the new year, we will be needing to carry over the 65. Well, pardon me. We had budgeted last year 5,000. We had received a bill for 3,056, but in fact it will be paid in 2015 for a total of approximately $6,500. Thank you.
So, if I could just add a comment where the money is coming from. First item, the seismic evaluation would be from taxes, 10.5. But the second item, I'm looking to you, Jen. I know that we have a contribution that we've received some money for the digitizing microfiche. So if you could just briefly speak to that.
Yeah, we do have sufficient funding in the deferred revenue related to the electronic conversion fees that we collect on a number of the building permits. So that could fund this request in its entirety.
Oh. And you said you didn't have as much good news. It's just popping up like mushrooms, I tell you.
Well, you know the strategy. Scare you at the beginning, right?
Okay, we'll open it up to the public. No, committee. Councillor Martin?
I'm confused again. What? Yeah, I know. How can this be on the budget to decide if we're going to fund it or not, if it's already been sent out?
Some of these items, the issue is that we have to show the planned expenditure. So they are on the list. I'm trying to think of a better way to explain this,
But wouldn't
Jen.
this be part of core if we're already anticipating that this is going to be a charge and it's already gone out? It's not as though this council can then now say, no, we're not going to fund this. because we're going to get a bill.
You want to take that one?
Are we kind of reviewing what makes it a special project versus a core expenditure? Is that really your question?
My question is that you're bringing to me an item that I don't really have a choice in paying or not, because it's already gone out.
And the project hasn't been completed. So we need to tell you now, when you see the actual coming in for this year, you're going to say, what did you spend that money on? And we say, well, we carried forward a number of items. Like this is basically cleanup, because you need to know what is going to be spent in 2014, so you don't get a big surprise when we say, well, those were all carried forward. Because if we didn't do that, if I was in your shoes, that wouldn't be great either, right? Like you need to know where the money is going for these carry forward projects.
No, and I understand what you're saying, but I mean, we budgeted 5,000 and we're over budget by 1,500. But I don't have a choice if I want to fund that over. I mean, I have to.
And you could say that about any project, that we have to do our best estimate last year, and then if it isn't complete at year end and it's over budget, we do have to fund it, unless you decide to stop the project in the middle, right? Is that your question on that one?
Councillor Day.
Thanks. If I understand correctly, I guess if we really had our knickers in a twist about it, we could say, you know, hold the presses. We don't want to spend that extra money. But there is a possible revenue source for the microfiche. In the case of the seismic evaluation, that's more of a choice item going forward, because that's our plan for this year. So I think because we're talking about special projects, some of our special projects are ones that we get to decide about, and some of them are here for our information because they're pretty close and they were approved before. They still need our approval again.
And if I can just add to it, I think it's really important to keep your eye on it, because when we get to tangible capital assets, I think it was last year you approved a new snorkel truck, okay, for 1.35 million, and unfortunately when the dust settled, it's come in considerably under or considerably over budget. Those are the kind of things that you need to know about, which is why I'd sooner err on the side of caution and put it on here so that you know what's going on, in terms of, you might have approved it last year, but has it stayed on budget? Has it gone over budget? And, you know, are you still okay with that?
Thank you. Anything further? Seeing none, you're off the hook. Thank you, Flo. So engineering, I'm assuming, is the next one up. Dr. Michael.
Most of them on this page are mine, but I'll hand over to Emmett when we get there. So the risk mitigation that we have on the books, a number of risk surveys that were done when we used to be part of MIA. And in order to show that we are actually gradually working away at those, this is supposed to be an annual program. And I apologize that nothing got done last year, but I think that was one of the ones that got missed, because we weren't in those days allowed to look at the budget when it was done. So we couldn't tell what we were supposed to be doing. We had to try and remember what you'd said in the meetings, or look at the minutes and then see if we could find it in the computer. And I think that's probably why that one got missed. The Lookout Brook Dam safety work, that's an ongoing program resulting from recommendations both from the province and the safety review of the dam we had. It was a much bigger item in 2014, and that the final report for that is just being finished up. That's why part of that is carried over to this year. All of the investigative work was done in 2014, and they submitted their draft report in January. So that's just completing that study, and you'll get that final report at the appropriate committee when it's done. It's quite interesting, actually. bridge repairs, the bridge is gradually deteriorating, and we're trying to minimize the amount we spend on it to keep it going. But the engineer's report a year ago was fairly showed that there were things that needed to be done that are much more expensive than we've had to do to date. We've been able to do these repairs for about $25,000 a year, but in 2014 we did some investigative work in order to come up with the budget for 2015, give us some confidence in that. Bridge work isn't of the type we're required to do, isn't something we do a lot of, and that's the estimate to keep the bridge at a point where we don't need to reduce the stipulated load. The Urban Ecology Master Plan is largely a stormwater plan, stormwater or rainwater plan. It's basically for that amount, it's a study of the Triangle Mountain drainage, and as probably most of you know, the Triangle Mountain drainage has been a problem for years. We are currently disposing of stormwater from Triangle Mountain on a piece of land, two pieces of land really, but mainly the Pattison Pit, which the city doesn't own, and we have to allow for the fact that one day the owner of that land will say, well, look, I'm in a position now to develop this, and I'd like you to stop disposing of your water on our land. We do have a solution for that. It's about $2 million. What we'd like to do is find a better solution, i.e. one that's a lot less. So in order to be ready for that day, we need to come up with a plan that doesn't require us to build the $2 million pipeline, but allows us to work with the developers in the region to deal with most of the water on site, or maybe even all of it, and we believe that's possible. Also trying to slow the amount of water coming in would be part of the plan. So one of the major expenses involved in this, in fact the major expense, is doing that plan for cheaper solutions for the Triangle Mountain drainage. I'll contrast it with a similar problem we had in Langford way back in '95, where the storm water master plan that was done to deal with Bellston Creek came in over budget at $300,000. That was the RFP result, and council approved it because you're solving a problem that's in the millions by spending a few $100,000. That's the intent of it. Transportation master plan, I will turn over to Emmett.
Thank you. Chair, Transportation Master Plan, we're asking for $41,500 to complete. There's $16,500 is actually the money to complete, and this has largely to do with the incorporating the Ani lands or the Capital City Centre. As you know, there was no developer really in place while we were doing the transportation plan, and you'll recall there were a number of different solutions put forward for that land, including the possibility of using the Galloping Goose Trail as a part of a couplet. We're not suggesting we do that, but we do need to finish the plan and the connection through to the back. That's the part of it. Also, the fact that Ani was not available to help to be there at the time to finish the plan means that we have to bring it forward into another council and again do a little more public engagement, I think, at that point. So that's where the $16,500, which is part of the $41,000. The other $25,000 is for us to get some very detailed streetscape plans, street level plans done in support of the economic development plan for the areas that are mentioned in the economic development plan, which will help us, which will help the development community, economic development, and also help with grant applications. So that's what the ask is there. Is there any?
So moving on, actually, I just want to say that the urban ecology master plan, because it's essentially a stormwater master plan, which will come up with the projects and amounts for a DCC bylaw, can be funded out of future collection from the DCC bylaw. And we discussed this with finance, and they said, okay, but as long as you pass the DCC bylaw before you spend any money. So that's the deal.
Could I just interject here, Mr. Chair? I just wanted to remind Council the sources of funds for some of these, and you might want to ask a question, hint, that. Whoops. So, first of all, because it's getting to be a bit of a list for you to remember here, we had the risk mitigation project for $10,000. That money's coming from a statutory reserve. The Lookout Brook Dam, that money has already been raised in taxation, so that's the good news. We already have the money for that to complete that project. The bridge repairs, that is coming mainly from a statutory reserve. Just hang on a sec here. I see that number's changed. Stat reserve and from tax bridge repairs. That's the Lagoon Bridge, is it?
Yes.
And I believe I saw that money coming in from one of Ian's projects earmarked for that bridge.
No, I don't think Ian had any.
No, but there was $100,000 contribution toward the bridge, I believe. We got a
from that is
Pacific.
Part of Pacific Landings.
Yes.
Obligations currently in their development.
So that's important for council after I've depressed them with all of this bad news, is that we do have some money coming in from some of these other areas, okay? And just to complete the urban ecology master plan, was that the DCC roads? That one in the transportation, we had DCCs involved. The new proposed DCCs were the storm drainage ones for the urban ecology. We don't have that yet, so you need to get that in place.
That's coming on the list.
And the transportation master plan, that can be funded by DCC roads, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the coastline erosion plan, stat reserves, and likewise bridge inspections, just to get you up to speed. Now,
I think the coastline erosion, half of that stat reserve from last year, and half is new.
That's correct. But one question council may want, because I did ask this question, because I'm sometimes don't understand all of this either, is when you do a plan, who's executing it and at what cost, okay? So that might be something to think about when you see these plans, so that one of the answers I got was, well, developers will actually be paying for some of this, but that's an important thing, is the plan is only a plan, but what are we going to do with it to actually execute it, okay?
I just want to make sure that we stay on track and get a description of the items, and then we can talk about the rest of the funding and have some questions as well. But let's get a description on the line items first, and we'll.
Okay. Do you want to go coastline erosion?
Okay, so the coastline erosion, $75,000 was budgeted last year to put out an RFP and have the safety of the sewage pump station down there on the coastline looked at, and figure out a plan for protecting it in the currently and in the future, and or a date for when it has to be replaced. And as has been outlined in a previous report to council, there are other assets at risk on the coastline there. And so the RFP is actually written for the pump station. That I haven't actually got it out the door, but it's written. And the next project would be the end of Ocean Boulevard and the duplexes. Or you could pick one of the others if you so choose. There are other items at risk. We're on
that's still the coastline erosion
plan. Okay. And we would be able to do some improvements with that money too. But I think it's fair to say that the really urgent one is the pump station. The next line is bridge inspections. That's the small bridges. It's not the Esquimalt Lagoon Bridge. Small bridges and large culverts, which are essentially bridges. Now, the carbon offset money is money that we are supposed to budget and put in, buy carbon offsets with, but council made the decision not to use it to buy carbon offsets after there was a lot of question about that fund, but rather to use it to actually reduce our costs and reduce our energy use at the same time. So this money is that's budgeted for 2015 is last year's carbon offsets plus this year's, and the proposal is to use it to replace current HPS streetlights with LED streetlights. Has a payback of about 7 or 8 years, and we did some installations of LED streetlights last year, and everybody seems to like the result. So, proposal is to carry on, and all of this 5 years of carbon offsets would be used to keep replacing LED lights, and reducing our budget for electricity for those lights, as well as our maintenance costs, because the LED lights last considerably longer. The next item is subdivision development bylaw, and the next 3 items are Emmett's.
Yeah, the subdivision development bylaw is really critical that we can get to this year. The $15,000 there is for the consultants to prepare the drawings for the subdivision standards, and there's a fair amount of staff work that's already gone into this. But now we're at the point where we need to have these the drawings done so that we can be very clear with our developers of what's expected. And I think I know the planning department's in great support of this to be done. So the next one is traffic count program. Now that's a new program, although we have done some in the past, and we did do some as a part of the transportation plan. The traffic count program, I'm going to just tell a little story here about what we did at when we put in the traffic calming. We did some counts before and after the traffic calming, and we did speed counts as well. And it was able to prove that our traffic calming installation in the Brittany and Sunridge Valley area was very effective. There's a number of things that we can get from the traffic counts besides that sort of thing. One is they're very useful for the development community. The developers, which in support of economic development, the developers are often looking for just how many cars come past this location, what's the frequency, how many times does this happen. There's that, and there's also the feedback of how we're doing with our active transportation, because the new counters that are recommended here will actually differentiate between vehicles and bicycles with one set of hoses. They can tell the difference in the amount of pressure that's put on the hose. So in the first year of this, you see that there's 14,950, and every following year is 7,350. The difference in the cost of the first year is to actually buy 3 of these traffic counters that are advanced traffic counters that will take care of cyclists as well as vehicles. And so that's what you see there on that one. The engineering office changes, I think, they're deferred back to 2017, and really that'll probably be a part of a greater discussion of what we do with this building and how we organize the space in this building. So that's pushed off in the future, so I don't think we really need to concern ourselves with that one at this point. The new DCC bylaw, as has been referenced before, is going to be for the roads and for drainage. The roads DCC bylaw is necessary because coming out of the transportation plan, we're imminently, as you've seen, because you've seen a draft of it in your materials, that there are a number of projects, a number of new projects recommended in the transportation master plan, and those need to find their way into the DCC bylaw, or at least some of them need to find their way into the DCC bylaw so we can access DCC funds, and so we can work with that funding to build those road projects as part of the funding sources. The DCC bylaw for drainage, which will be a part of this project, is really we have a little bit, we know a little bit about what's required for drainage at this point, even before doing the drainage or the stormwater master plan, rainwater master plan, urban ecology master plan. And what this will do is getting this DCC bylaw enacted now with what we know we need to get done will allow us to access the funds to actually do to actually pay for the urban ecology master plan from these funds. Andrew, I'm sorry, Director of Finance, correct me if I'm wrong, it'll allow us to borrow against future DCCs, borrow from one to the other, is that correct?
I'm sorry, I would have to research that. I haven't looked into DCCs lately.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I believe that it allows us to borrow from the roads DCC into the drainage DCC and pay it back. So we're not actually borrowing money to do it, but we'll follow up on that. And that's
it.
Land use bylaw.
Yeah, the last one is the Wolfert pump station upgrade.
Yes.
The last one in this year, anyway, and that is there's a problem pump there that needs to be replaced, and we've done some repairs to it, but it just it won't settle down, and it needs to be replaced, or it's going to cost money.
Thank you. And committee, I know I did miss the IT line here, so we'll jump back to that after we finish the engineering stuff. So, Andrea, did you have any more comments on the funding sources that started before we go into public comment or questions?
I think we've commented on the DCCs, and I've got a question there that I'll check into, which was just raised. So, no, that's...
Groovy, thank you. Public? No. Committee? Councillor Nolt.
Thank you. We still haven't had an explanation of the IT hardware or the Colwood Art Centre project.
Yeah, we're not quite done. Yeah, all that's under the planning business. So we're doing department by department. So we're getting to that.
Thank you. I had one question for engineering then. Basically, on the coastline erosion plans and impacts versus the bridge repairs, is the bridge repair maybe too early, given that we haven't actually studied what the coastline erosion is going to be? I'm just wondering about the timelines on that, whether the bridge repair is that urgent that it can't be put off, or... What I don't want to see is us spending $100,000+ on the bridge and then finding out it's only going to last another couple of years due to erosion.
According to the report by the structural engineers that looked at the bridge, this work is required this year. We didn't do it last year because they said specifically you've got 2 years to get this work done. Otherwise, effectively, they haven't sanctioned the safety of the bridge. So we could go back to them and ask them to take another look at it and see if they're willing to let us go some more years. But you'd probably spend $35,000 for them to look at the bridge again. And really it's a question of, do we want to keep the bridge open at this expense or not? And you'll see that 5 years from now I've allowed more money because it is going to get more expensive every year.
Thank you. And one final question on the traffic count program. Will those new traffic counters allow us to measure vehicle speeds as well as numbers?
Yes, they will.
Because I was thinking we have a number of roads here that I believe we have serious speed problems, and this would be a good lever to apply to the RCMP to do their job.
Good point. Any other questions on engineering / sewer? Director of Admin, you had a question?
I don't think we've answered the IT hardware question.
No, we're going to jump back to that. We just want to finish the engineering business. So, Rob.
Thank you.
Martin. Councillor Martin.
That's okay. Bridge repairs, you alluded that there'd be a percentage between reserves and taxation. Do we know what the percentage is?
The reserve component is simply the unspent funding from 2014. So it's a minor component. It's about 10% funding in 2015 is through the reserves. because those are the unspent tax dollars from 2014, and then the balance is proposed through taxation.
And my second question is the master plans in previous years have been funded through gas tax. And if we are not funding through gas tax, and there was a philosophical reason we chose to do that, if we're not going to be funding through gas tax, does that mean that we've down the road have different plans on where that money's going to be spent? Because the idea was that we were saving the DCCs because we had gas tax available.
Yeah, I think there's a change that's happened in what you can use the gas tax for. It's pretty open now, so I think that's one of the things where DCCs are restricted use. Gas tax is virtually any capital use is allowable. They recently added disaster mitigation, actually, and hence the DCCs being the more restricted rather than the less restricted now. The idea could be, if you so wish, to use that first. But using the future stormwater DCCs for the stormwater work is what's normally done, because you do that work so that you can create a DCC bylaw, collect the money or borrow the money, and do the work. It saves you using either taxes or the gas tax.
The only issue I have, the only thing is that gas tax is short term, whereas DCCs will last us forever. So is our 5-year plan down the road, have we project out that we maximize out our gas tax expenditures?
Well, that's a good question.
That is a good question.
We do have a document in the package this evening that shows a bit of a projection on your gas tax money, so we can look at that if you like. It's on our last agenda item. It's under deferred revenue. Okay.
Any other questions on the engineering portion? Seeing none, Andrea, we'll jump back to the IT and get that wrapped up.
So the IT hardware, the majority of the city's IT hardware replacement is within the core budget. This special project here is an additional request, and the $17,500 is made up of a request for a $4,000 engineering mapping laptop, $1,500 conference phone for the committee room back there, and then $12,000 for a backup server to be purchased and installed at the fire hall. So those are the components there. And the proposed funding source for all three is taxation.
Thank you. Questions? Mayor Hamilton?
You bring up $12,000 on a server upgrade to the fire hall. Are we not in need of a server upgrade for our general purposes as well?
This is a backup server, and we did just purchase a new server for City Hall here, and I don't yet know if that's being implemented, but that was just purchased in January.
Okay, just so that one's been done. Thanks.
Okay, our final department is planning. Am I correct? So, Director of Planning.
The best for last. Yeah, best I can. So first on the list is a land use bylaw review and downtown revitalization strategy. A total of $150,000 is requested from gas tax to hire a professional consultant to undertake a major review, update, and rewrite of the Colwood land use bylaw. What we're seeking to create here is an innovative and hopefully award-winning bylaw that will take the regulation of land use, urban design, and development to a whole new level. If this sounds familiar, it was part of the 2014 ask, but yeah. So regulative aspects of the bylaw will be greatly enhanced by the heavy use of illustrative graphics for the ease of interpretation by developers, elected officials, municipal staff, and the public. Staff are also proposing that the project include actions to forward downtown revitalization as called for in the 2014 Code Economic Development Strategy. So that's that one. So next up, it's our Colwood Arts Center line item, a total of $6,200. And I'd like to acknowledge members of the West Shore Arts Center committee, which was created through the work of the City Council and our consultant team at Schick Schreiner Associates. So I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight. The $6,200 is a modest ask. I think the committee started at $80,000, so it's quite a reasonable. We settled on 62 as a proposal, and that funding would be for the committee to assist with the establishment of an office, website, and illustrations for designer, public engagement, and the development of a case for support for the Arts Center. The committee, as I said, was created in 2014 as an arm's-length, non-statutory committee to be initially supported through the help of Schick Schreiner Associates, the city's consultants. Schick Schreiner Associates, their contract is now over, and the committee will be taking the torch, so to speak, in terms of getting this project complete. And I'd like to note that there will be a staff report that presents a proposal from the committee and also a final report from our feeder consultants, and we're scheduling that for the council meeting on the 23rd, the next council meeting. Next up is our urban forest strategy. This is another one that we had planned for 2014, and we're putting it back for 2016. This would be aligned with the urban ecology strategy and provide the urban forestry aspects of that plan. It would implement the city's vision in regards to tree management within the municipality on public and private lands to ensure that the city maintains sufficient tree cover, which is suitable for changing the environment, aiming to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide clean air. This would come from gas tax. Number 4 here, we've got the social plan. We've proposed this for 2017, and this is coming straight from the previous council's strategic priorities. And the social plan would create a list of policies from the Fish Community Plan, which support Colwood's social fabric and identity, and how these policies should be supported and followed. So the $40,000 would go toward a consulting group or individual that would assist with this project. And I don't know if you see a pattern here, but we're looking at one big project a year. We're hoping to, our motto is to get stuff done, and we want to be realistic about what we can achieve. And lastly, we've got a summer co-op student position. This was, to be blunt, our sacrificial lamb for the 2015 budget, and had proposed that it go to 2016. Something that we feel strongly about, but given the pressures of the 2015 budget, we're happy to have it as a 2016 item. And that would cover the cost of hiring cooperative education students within the planning department for 4 months in the summer of 2016. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Public? No? Committee? Councillor Knoll.
A couple of quick questions. The land use bylaw review, I'm hoping that when that's done, the intent is to harmonize that with the official community plan. Is that correct? And the other question is, I'm disappointed to see the forest strategy, urban forest strategy, moved back, because I think that should also be harmonized with our land use bylaw. If we're talking about preserving trees and we look at some of our current subdivisions as anything but a preservation of trees, I would really like to see that reviewed earlier rather than later.
Mayor Hamilton, did you have your...
Lost my spot here, so I'm going to wait.
Okay. Andrea, did you have any comment on the funding sources?
Sure. So for the planning projects, let's just have a look here. The land use bylaw review, as Ian has mentioned, is gas tax. The Arts Centre project is a statutory reserve. The urban forest strategy is gas tax. Social plan is taxation, same with the co-op student. And that's it for planning.
Thank you. So at the end of the day, new taxes, not including carryovers, is about 241,000 or 2%.
That is
lift?
correct. That's why you have the summary at the bottom of the page there.
Great.
Yeah.
Any questions, Councillor Day?
Thank you. I'm just wondering about the urban forest strategy and the land use bylaw, whether or not they could be done together, because they're both coming from gas tax, so it shouldn't make a big difference in terms of whether or not it's 1 year or the next. And because they're both being done by consultants, I'm wondering if that would make it manageable if they were done together. I realize that even though there's a consultant doing it, there is a considerable amount of staff oversight that would be involved. So just wondering if that's a possibility.
Yen?
I think realistically, if we were going to add to that project, we should look at it as a 2015-2016 project. We've already shoehorned downtown revitalization aspects into that proposal for land use bylaw update. The urban forest strategy aspects of this, we were looking to align with the stormwater management aspects of the urban ecology plan, and we'd front load that stormwater management work. So I think given our capacity to handle the project, it would probably be a 2015-2016 project nonetheless.
Okay. Thank you. So Andrea, in terms of moving forward on this particular section, what would you propose?
In terms of motions, or what were you?
Yes. So looking at this list, it already represents a 2% lift. So I guess committee needs to either decide whether we're going to ixnay a project, or change the funding source, or send it back to directors to prioritize which ones they feel is important.
Yeah, the prioritization and perhaps the timing might be worth a second look by your managers. I leave that up to council's advice there.
Mayor Hamilton?
And I was going to say, if we're going to do that, then I would suggest that when they revise for that prioritization, that they could make clear where those funding sources will be coming from.
Okay. So what I would suggest then is we have a motion that would direct staff to prioritize this list and clearly indicate where the funding sources are to come from, and then that be presented to a future budget meeting. Would that be acceptable, Andrea? That makes sense?
Yeah, we can easily include the funding sources. I apologize because I do have them on another piece of paper so that you will have that readily available. I just don't know in terms of the prioritization, like it's kind of over to the managers there. And in terms of the timing, like I've heard some discussion this evening about maybe certain projects would do well if they were done at the same time. And maybe that's something that you could look at. I am concerned about the dollar value that's happening in 2015. And then when we look forward, of course, there's always other things that come up, but it's certainly not spread out. So I guess I'm just concerned about capacity within each department to do this amount of projects. But that's just my personal concern.
Okay. Committee Director of Engineering?
Yeah, obviously this budget timeline's a bit compressed, so we've only just put together the numbers after the review with the finance department and all the departments. We've just put together the numbers of how much staff time we think it's going to take and whose, and so at the next meeting we would be much better prepared to provide that information,
including the priorities that each department sees. Okay. Committee, any comments? They wish to make a motion directing staff to directing managers to prioritize their special projects list. Okay. Moved by Councillor Arnault. Did you get the gist of that motion? Okay. Any, Andrea, did you want to add anything else?
No, I just, when we were done this section, I just wondered if we might respectfully request maybe a 5-minute break because it's kind of a lot of work.
Absolutely. Okay. So if there's no further questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? We'll just have a 5-minute break. Jason, yes. I think we're going to get moving. PDQ. So after our last session, we're up to about 6.9% tax increase. So there's a couple of things I would challenge the directors and managers to come back with a list, a serious list of things that you feel are important, and to cut those that are less important. Because if we cut, they might not be the ones that you are hoping to save. So here's your chance to put 1, 2, 3, or 4 next to them. The other thing is there's one item on the list that was more council-driven, and that was the service capacity review. And I have been asked whether we can just go back and address that one particular item, since it is a council initiative, and either strike it or move it to another year. And that's 70 grand off the table. Makes things a wee bit easier. I think that's 70, isn't it? 75, even better. Another good news mushroom popping up. So I'll leave it to committee to decide.
I would move that we not completely forget about it, but I think it's going to be at least 2017 before we could really be prepared to undertake a service capacity review that had real meaning for us. So could we move it to 2017?
Is committee happy with that? No qualms? Do you want a motion to that effect? Okay, perfect. Perfect. That's great. Thanks for your patience, everyone. And
So just so it noted that we cut the whole budget by a third right there, so staff should have no problem.
so let the minutes reflect. Leadership, we've cut the budget, increased by a third. Thank you.
There's one item I believe we've forgotten at the very end there, and maybe our engineer can speak to it, the pump station.
He did.
Did you? Oh.
Yeah, he tied it in with the engineering stuff. Yeah. All right, 2.4, Department Directors, Tangible Capital Assets, and Pergola. So who's taking that asset? Which one is going first, Andrea? Any preference?
On the, I can speak to some of these actually, Pat. The carpet tile, we're on the TCA list. So you'll see some numbers there that might look a little peculiar. We had $35,000 for carpet tile, but really this is renovation. So the whole front entrance of the building that was done. And we actually brought this back to council to move some money around into the budget because we didn't have enough. You might recall that. So when the dust settled, the renos are now completed out the front, as far as I know. But the carpet tile still has not been done, and that's what that $13,500 represents, and that would come from a statutory reserve. The next two items come from Jeff, our emergency coordinator, and they are to do with storage for a lot of his supplies. Some of it got done last year, but he has actually requested additional storage. That's why it's at $8,500 right now. And the emergency management, that $2,500 is some storage over at the senior center, I believe, at West Shore Parks and Rec. Now, as a side note to this, when I sat down with Jeff and went through his budget, it had gone from about a $40,000 budget last year to $85,000. And I will tell you that I did get a red pen out, and I did heavily edit a lot of the requests. One of the items on his budget does show up down below here, I believe, as an emergency generator. So these are a couple of items from Jeff Amy. And Pat, over to you. And they are from tax, the emergency ones. And the furniture for admin is over to you.
Thank you. So the furniture for administration, we had a $6,000 budget in 2014 because the administration department went through a reorganization. We wanted to wait and see once the front foyer renovations were done and we'd move people around whether we'd even need to buy furniture or if we could just move our own furniture that we already had around, which is what we were able to do, and give our communications manager real furniture to work on. So that was nice. I'm not sure if that money was absorbed into the front counter layout plan or not in the reception area. The $10,000 that we were talking about for 2015 is for our bylaw enforcement officers. So they do have some new bookshelves in there, but the furniture they're actually using, their desks are very old, and one of them you have to tape the drawer in order for it to stay closed so it doesn't pop open and you walk into it and hurt yourself. So as much as that is a bit of a safety issue, we probably have another desk we could trade it out with and move this to 2016 if we have to, but they have been on the very long years worth of list of waiting for their turn to get some newer furniture. And the other items that we have a couple of things on here that are under our bylaw division, and the senior bylaw enforcement officer came tonight, so he can come up and speak to the items that he has on the agenda.
Good evening, committee. We have some radios that are on in the budget for 2018. These are Crest radios. Currently, the bylaw department has 3 Crest radios. We did do an upgrade a couple of years ago, but in 2018, Crest has notified us there's going to be a significant upgrade of the system, and the current radios that we have will no longer be functional. So we have to look at in 2018 and replacing the 3 radios that are within the department. Vehicles. Vehicle 38 that the bylaw department currently uses is 10 years old. It is either the second or third oldest vehicle in the fleet. It is time to exchange that vehicle out. So that vehicle is slated to be recycled out in 2015. Several vehicles were looked at, and we're in consultation with our fleet manager to which vehicle is going to best suit our needs for our duties, and to be able to accommodate the equipment we carry, be able to perform the duties that we do, going off-road, jumping curbs, and etc. And part of the consideration with those vehicles is the maintenance of those vehicles. Because we are a little tougher on the harder on the vehicles, we need a vehicle that's a little bit more robust to handle that everyday driving that we do. Also, along with the vehicles, we have to we're looking at changing out the emergency equipment on the vehicles. This technology is all LED technology. The current equipment on the vehicle is all rotator lights. It's all mechanical, which draw a lot of power from the vehicle. Currently, the vehicle has to be left running when the emergency equipment is operating, so we are emitting carbon emissions. The newer equipment with the LED technology, we are able to turn off the vehicle and run the equipment on the battery only, and have no carbon emissions while we're sitting at a traffic control project. Just recently we did traffic control for 2 hours because of a gas line strike. Well, for 2 hours our vehicles were idling, producing carbon emissions. So this technology is pricey, but it is also renewable. When we go to renew the vehicle in 10 years, we can actually take the equipment off the vehicle and place it onto the next vehicle, and we're looking at between 15 and 20-year lifespan, as long as none of the items deteriorate or break down or etc.
What are the funding sources for the last few items, radios, vehicles, and the equipment?
Radios are coming from tax. Vehicles are from a statutory reserve fleet replacement. And the vehicle equipment is tax.
Do you want better brakes on the current vehicles, Kevin, so you don't hop the curb? You can stop before you get there, or does that help?
Unfortunately, sometimes we go where the job takes us, and sometimes we have to jump the curb.
I know Rob was going to ask that question anyways. He's just itching. Carry on. Is that it?
That's it for me.
Perfect. So, committee questions.
Can you tell me, vehicle-wise, do we not have, is this part of the vehicle replacement plan?
Yes,
so
it is part of the.
I'm just curious why it's in the budget if it's part of the vehicle replacement plan.
Go ahead.
Still has-
Yeah.
No, I know it has to be in. No, but I mean, if it's like we have a line item, which is the vehicle replacement, right? We do not have a line item for vehicle replacement.
No, any fleet that is to be replaced would be within your TCA budget.
Okay. And so, where does this fit within the vehicle replacement fleet?
This is
Priority.
included in this. This is on target, on budget for being replaced this year.
Because I haven't seen it. The vehicle replacement plan.
I'm having a hard time answering some of these questions, I'm afraid, because I wasn't here last year. I have seen the fleet replacement plan, and basically I believe it was used as a management tool, from what I can see, to figure out how much money council should be putting into its fleet replacement reserve each year. It's an effort to estimate your future requirements, and then you can smooth those requirements out once you know what you're going to be spending over the next 20 years.
Okay. Yeah, good. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. And I forgot to ask committee if they had any questions for the Director of Administration on her stuff. Is there anything that was burning? No? All exciting? No? Okay. So we'll move on to fire. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether do you want to go right through the whole 5 years? I don't know what the plan is here, because I do know this year is set in stone, but the other years rather fluctuate. So did you want to go through everything?
I think that's been what's happening loosely, is just going over what just
Everything that's
everything. Yeah, just briefly.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. In 2014, there was one renovation for the bathrooms in the fire station upstairs that could not be completed. So that $22,000 rolled over in the city's budget, and the Director of Finance allowed me to go forward with that in 2015, but it still has to be recorded as a 2015 capital project. I'm happy to say that that should be complete in about 2 weeks, and it should be about $4,000 under budget. The $40,000 is two things. The major component there is $35,000 to rebuild the piping and plumbing, as well as the monitor system on our foam trailer. It was first anticipated that perhaps we could look into replacing it. When we got some of the prices back, there's no way we could bring that forward. We feel we can rebuild that in-house with our mechanic and take care of that. The other is $5,000, and that's for a rescue sled that attaches to our Sea-Doo. And the other is the replacement of Snorkel 5.7, which I'm not sure when those payments start coming out. I believe there's a step process, chassis, et cetera, et cetera. As far as we know, that vehicle is going to be on time. Whenever they tell that to me and it's a year away, you can anticipate it might be early 2016 instead of late 2015. In 2015, we did roll over $16,000, which was a building improvement for a folding partition to separate our upstairs. So the association would still have their space, but we could still do training on the other side, other than shutting down all of the association space and taking it all over. We've had that in the budget now for a few years, but the timing just has not been right, and the need, at least as far as I feel, to bring that forward. So that's been moved to 2016 for now. Got here. 2017 has $175,000, and that is to build a training site in our back compound. And what they are is they're made up of sea cans, and they look quite presentable, and they'll be painted and colored to blend in with the natural forest. And these are not to have fires in to create smoke that way. These would be artificial smoke would be used in these so that the neighbors would not be upset. And so that's $150,000 there. $25,000 is we have in there to do the siding on the station. All of the siding on the station is original, 1972. We've taken good care of it. We've kept it painted, but it's showing its age. So that's in there. $65,000 is a replacement of the pickup truck, the chief's vehicle 5.0. It'll be over 150,000 kilometers by then, and that is in the vehicle replacement plan already, all of the vehicles that I speak about here. Also $850,000, that is the replacement of engine 5.1. And in speaking with finance, there is a chance that we can move this forward a year, but I wouldn't like to say that right now at this time because I really don't know what kind of shape it's going to be in as we get closer. But there is a possibility that that could move 1 year up to 2018, just to allow for other things to happen within the city without it compounding the overall equipment replacement program. So after 2017, other than some small utility vehicles in 2020, it would be 2022 before a major piece of apparatus is going to be replaced, which is also, as I say, in our equipment replacement program. We have $10,000 for dry suits. Now, that's a replacement, so I'm not sure that it should even be in this capital. That would probably come under equipment replacement because we do have 4 dry suits that we wear when we're out on the Sea-Doo in the boat. The other is $20,000 in paving, and I have had Public Works out to measure and give an estimate on that, and that would pave the portion that would lead up to where our training site is going to be and allow for more parking, as we have taken on a number of new volunteer firefighters, and we certainly require the space there. 2018 is $110,000. $60,000 is another inspection vehicle, and $50,000 is a thermal imaging camera for Snorkel 5.7. 2019, there's $10,000 in there, and we ran into a few problems this year with some of our cards in our fire alarm panel within the station, and we've been able to fix it, and the best guess is that it should operate for another 5 years. But I did put that in because I don't want to lose sight of it. So 2019, there's $10,000 in there to replace the actual fire alarm panel for the station itself. And I think that's all of it. Any questions?
Okay, thanks, Chief. Where's the funding coming from?
Okay.
For 2015, anyway.
So the building improvements were a statutory reserve, as were the equipment replacement. The fire truck, part of it was 1.35 for lease. The balance was coming from our fire fleet replacement reserve. That was the amount that came in over budget because we'd already gone and got approval for the amount of the borrowing. So we couldn't change that easily. And the dry suits are tax, as is the paving, which is tax.
Thank you. Committee. Oh, Councillor Martin.
Thanks. I guess I'm just trying to understand from a record-keeping standpoint, why at 1.675 million and 1.3 of that is 10-year lease. Why do we show it as a one-time cost and not amortize it over the 10-year? So that showing that it's like $130,000 a year over the 10-year period. I'm just curious.
Yeah, what you're almost referring to is the amortization expense. So we do expense it. We capitalize the item. These are all capital items. So all of these items aren't expenses. They are capitalized, and then they are amortized and expensed on the books over their useful lives, which varies depending on
But
the
is it
classification.
truly our capital if we haven't paid for it yet then? It is? Okay.
So you'll see that expense of 130,000 or whatever elsewhere in the budget, year over year over year.
Yes, that will show up as your debt payments.
Yes, we don't directly budget for amortization expense.
Anything else? Okay, moving on to the IT stuff.
So there's a number of software line items in the capital budget, so I'll just go through each one. The majority of these were all approved in either as far back as 2012 or 2013 or 2014. Starting with the Microsoft Dynamics, the $37,500, we've pushed that forward to 2016. The primary reason you see a number of these IT items pushed forward to 2016 is the IT manager auxiliary position is currently not filled. So one thought is really you need that individual there to put together your IT work plan. And that's why a number of items have been pushed out. So with respect to the Microsoft Dynamics software implementation, these are line items that were approved in the 2014 budget and were not implemented. $21,000 relates to the PaperSave invoice software, which ties in part with records management as it pertains to some of the finance records within Great Plains, the core financial system. There's been $10,000 budgeted for a virtual city hall, so an add-on to the city's website with respect to payment of property taxation, business licenses, that kind of thing. The management team has also discussed a more global approach with respect to virtual city hall through other items of software that are mentioned down below. And then there's also a $6,500 budget for a project activity module. This is a piece of software that has been purchased but has not yet been fully implemented. Moving down to the city view. This $14,500 budget request for 2015. $12,000 of this relates to Streamline for workflow improvements with respect to the building department's request. And then there's also a $2,500 request. This relates to WorkSafe BC requirements to have us identify and track building projects where building inspectors may be exposed to hazardous materials. And the proposal right now is to reconfigure some of the CityView software so this tracking can be done. And then looking to 2016, the $10,000 request relates to land development tracking software. The SharePoint line item, again, this was a project or a software acquisition that was approved in the 2014 budget. And this relates to continuing the implementation of SharePoint. And that has been pushed out to 2016. And then we also have the GIS software, which just relates to implementation for the city and then the ongoing maintenance. And then lastly, the $26,800, this is a new request, and this relates to the installation of a fiber optic channel between City Hall and the fire hall. And that has been put in place for 2015. We did discuss that with the City of Langford IT staff as well, and they have encouraged us to keep that request for the current year, as that is more of a priority.
If I can give you just a bit of background, Jen is speaking to these items, but they're actually pulled in from a number of different departments. So, because what we were finding was that each department had a different piece of software in their workbook, and we thought it was going to, and you'll see this when we bring forward that IT workbook, that you can see at a glance what the different departments are asking for, because we feel that and we've talked about this amongst ourselves, we need some coordination, because otherwise the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing here. And so that's why you do see these lumped in together. And I apologize, I just noticed we've got some budget figures missing because this Jen was going through, so we can bring those back in so that you know where the money's coming from. But I think it will be better for council to see all this in one spot, because right now we really need help here. We need a coordination, and we need some sort of an IT plan. We had a very profitable meeting with Langford IT reps, and they were very clear that the fiber optics line is a priority between City Hall and the Fire Hall, because you heard about an item earlier this evening, and that was a backup server. So this is like off-site backup for City Hall, and it would be located over at the Fire Hall, provided that we had the fiber optic cable in place. So these things do go together. But you know, Jen and I are trying to coordinate this off the side of our desk, and it's a very busy time of the year, so we're just saying that, you know, there's definitely a need here to put some thought and probably some resources into our IT infrastructure, because we're really at risk right now.
Andrea, are all these items for 2015 anyways coming from taxation or reserves?
Jen, can you speak to that?
With the exception of the GIS software, everything is proposed to be funded through a statutory reserve, and the GIS software is taxation. Like I said, the majority of these have been funded for in previous years, and the funding has been set aside as the work wasn't done.
So we actually have a subset of reserve for future expenditure called computer equipment replacement, about $125,000 I think I've noticed in there.
Okay. Great. Any questions? Councillor Day and then Mayor Hamilton.
Sorry, just wondering why the GIS is funded differently?
Now, we've pulled this in from the engineering budget, I believe. Emmett, sorry, I'm looking at you because we were trying to centralize all of our software. But then we talked about amongst ourselves, and we said, well, GIS isn't used just for engineering either. Like, it's a very common technology. I think it's used, is it planning as well, Ian? And it's something that we would use to link with some of our other software. Building permits.
So wouldn't that mean it would come from the same reserve fund?
The primary reason is because it's in the budget. It's a recurring expenditure, so we typically stay away from using reserve funds to fund anything that's recurring because it's not sustainable. So that's the main reason that we've moved to proposed taxation for that.
Thank you. Mayor Hamilton.
Just a question on the City View and the association with the digitalization of the microfiche. Is there any sort of correlation to those integrating?
Oh.
See, this is how you flesh out whose item it really is, right?
Yeah.
Mayor Hamilton, through the chair. The microfiche is historical documents that we received from CRT prior to our incorporation. So we use those frequently when people are coming in to find out historical information or they're planning a renovation on the property, and this gives us ready access to the files. Currently, they're living in our O drive, which is readily accessible, and in the future, it will link in with the City View such that we will be able to open the file, click on a SharePoint button, get to the SharePoint site, and email it, for example, to the person on the phone who's requesting information. So it all well tied together. And again, I have to agree with our chief financial officers that we really do need a IT coordinator to help us pull this together so that they all work in a harmonious fashion. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, we'll move on then to engineering.
Okay, I'll just note that the emergency management generator has been postponed. It was in 2015, but it's been moved back. Sorry? Yes, it was trimmed because we got a new estimate on what that would cost. Trees for tomorrow was originally a total of $40,000. The project was done in Colwood Creek. Half of that was grant and half was from the municipality and or volunteers. So they require that you have some volunteer component. So there was a very large turnout of volunteers, which was estimated to cost about $1,500 to be a $1,500 value for the turnout of volunteers. So that was half of that went for the project, or nearly half went for the project last year, and we find it's turned out a lot cheaper than we anticipated. So to use up the rest of the grant, we can do another project with a lot of trees. I forget the number of trees, but it was a very large number. Now it's over to Emmett.
All right, thank you. Annual traffic calming improvements. This is building on the success of what happened on Sunridge Valley Drive. We ended up with one negative response to that and many positive responses, and I think the fire department was also pretty happy with it. We went up and measured the traffic engines and made sure that they could clear these. What you see here is kind of an ongoing program of traffic calming, because we do get a lot of requests for this. And we have some concerns down on Heatherbell Road that we were looking to address this year, but also because these the new speed cushion, they're called, are so effective, and the fire engines can get past them. What we were looking to do this year is look at some of the speed humps that we have on Wishart North that are a real impediment to the fire department and their emergency access there, and reducing those in size to more of the speed cushion size so that the fire engines can get through and the other vehicles have to stop. So that's that one. And then that one would go on into the future as well as issues come up. So there's that. There's DeVito Trail. We have that deferred to 2016 at this point. We still have some statutory right-of-way issues with the property owner that we're trying to work through. And also we feel that it's not really necessary until we start to get some development in the Ani development there. There's really nothing much to connect to until that point. The Welcome to Colwood sign, which has been so well received. The lighting for that was really a gift from, I guess, what is it called, Barton Insurance, and the latest car dealership that was approved there. They allowed us to come in and tap into their power to light the sign. And so that's they just said, sure, go ahead. And so that's tapped in, but it's a temporary thing. And so what we need to do is put in the infrastructure, which will be a transformer and a meter. Actually, it won't be a transformer, it'll be a meter and some connection up the pole. So that's what that money's for. We looked at the possibility of going solar on that, but we thought it would be about $15,000 and really not a lot of bang for the buck. It would be a big statement and not a lot of, be like greenwashing the project. There's better things we can do with solar than saving 30 watts of power. The Wilford Road and Whale Road traffic signal is put off to 2017. The idea there is that we see that as potential for a grant when we do some other works on the Galloping Goose Trail, which could come up in the future. We'll see what happens there. Traffic signal, UPS. UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply, not the UPS parcel service, the guys that break the guitars. We're talking about good UPS here. So these are, we have 2 locations left to get these done, and so that'll complete that project. And what that means is that when the power fails, all of our traffic signals will flash red instead of just going dark, and very much safer. And some of that is funded, as you'll hear, from a grant from ICBC. Wilford Road extension is off into the future. Don't think we need to talk about that. Well, I will say that it kind of requires View Royal to agree to it, but we'll go down that road when we get to it, quite literally. Kelly Road, yes. Okay, where can I go with Kelly Road? Well, as you know, we received approval from council to apply for the grant, and so that's a 2/3 grant, a third being from the federal government, a third being from the provincial government. Our 1/3, and this is an interesting. We'll refer back to what Councillor Robb asked earlier. Councillor Robb. Our 1/3 is proposed to come from DCCs. Sorry, Andy, if I'm jumping the gun, but DCCs and possibly a sewer LAS for the sewer component of that. But we have yet to put that together. At any rate, it is forecast to be done in 2016. Where is it there? To begin in 2016, should we get the grant, and we would need to tighten up the funding sources for that. But we have a little bit of time to do that one. And there'll be more information on that coming forward as we go. Bus stops. Bus stops, the 18,000 you see there, it represents 2 bus stops. BC Transit provides the bus shelters, and the $18,000 is for us to provide a power connection and a concrete pad and a good solid place to put the bus stop, or the bus shelter. The survey monuments, that's put off into the future. There's a little bit of, that just helps with the tightness of our GIS system and helps developers when they have to survey out things. So, but we're putting that off into the future as we determine what that program's going to look like. Just putting it on your radar basically for later. The Havenwood Crosswalk, that one there's a possibility we could get development frontage improvements to provide power to that. What we have, or at least provide power closer to that. What we have right now is we have a problem in that there's no readily available power to power that controller, which wouldn't necessarily be a problem if it was just flashing amber lights, but because it is classified as a mid-block pedestrian crossing, the transport, the acronym is escaping me right now. The TAC, Transportation Advisory Committee of Canada recommendations are that there be street lighting associated with that. And that would require a fairly substantial and robust solar installation to make that happen, or a fairly long distance for a power connection to be brought in. So we're putting it off for a year to see what happens in this year in terms of the development proceeding, and possibly to come up with the power supply if we need to. So that's why that one's put off. The Old Island Highway irrigation. We put a small amount of money into the design of it this past year, just a little preliminary design. And then what happened is we looked at the cost of connecting it now, which was fairly substantial, and the fact that we're talking about a sewage treatment plant that would be just up the street, where we would have immense amounts of water that we wanted to do something with. And it kind of made sense that maybe we should wait and see what happens with the Resource Recovery Center and possibly use that water for irrigation. So that's where that one went. Bicycle lanes on Metchosin Road. This is to follow the installation of the Metchosin, the Sooke Road, Metchosin Road sewer system there, the sewer pipe there. And so what this would do is we have some design money in 2015 and construction money in 2016, which we feel would dovetail nicely with the completion of that project. That project would come down about half of the way on Metchosin Road, between Sooke Road and Wishart Road, on the, trying to get this right, orient myself here, the south or west side of the road, basically the other side from where the CRD water main went in a couple of years ago. And it would allow us to paint in bike lanes on both sides of that section of road, which would complete a gap in our network for cycling. And then wayfinding signage, what we want to do there is do some pedestrian and cycling signage and this, I believe this is a gas tax funded one as well as some of the others. Pedestrian and cycling signage to help people orient themselves and get to the Galloping Goose Trail, get to our cycling infrastructure and our pedestrian infrastructure. And what we want to do is coordinate that design and that kind of way of look or that feel to the City of Colwood's successful signage to this point, and make that all kind of a theme and a branding of the city of Colwood, while still fitting it in with the CRD's wayfinding guidelines. So work within those two, and if one of those two wayfinding guidelines is going to have preference, it'll be ours. So I think that's about it for that. Oh, there's stuff on the other side. Oh, speed reader boards. Speed reader boards, this is the cost of 2 speed reader boards. One of these is to go at the top of the hill as we come up from the Metchosin, the former gravel pit. As you know, Council, you've received a number of complaints about the speeding in that area. So this would be a bit of the phase 1, this and the next item together. One of the speed reader boards would go at the top of that hill, and then if you just drop down to the next item down below, Metchosin Road, Painter to Kotlow, there's $30,000 in the first year and $200,000 in the second year. The $30,000 is for 2 islands in Metchosin Road, one just after the speed reader board at the top of the hill, and one just around the corner. And that would introduce the traffic calming that would convince people that this is not just a speedway that you come through, and that would lead them into the school zones nicely at a lower rate of speed. The $200,000 for the next one, you'll see is a pedestrian crosswalk, some sidewalk on both sides of the road, connecting Dunsmuir Middle School across through the crosswalk and up to the Royal Bay Bakery area, where there's a tremendous amount of crossing of kids that happens at lunch hour and so on and so forth. So just some protection there for that. Now, both of these items in the budget that you'll get will be, the hyperlinks are there. There's some drawings in place, so that'll follow. I should back up to the speed reader board. The second of the 2 speed reader boards will be solar powered and movable, so it's something that we can move from location to location. The first one we felt was important because it's just an ongoing problem there, and we need to make a real statement there and a permanent statement. The second one, I think it'll be more effective when we're able to put it in at a school zone for a month, take it out, move it to another location, and go on. There'll be there would normally be an associated, I guess, maintenance fee associated with that, but we would have the public works crews trained to do that, so that would be absorbed into what they're doing. The Painter Road and the Painter Road ped and bike connection, very clearly this is a pedestrian cycling connection only, although emergency vehicles would be able to use it. Put into for 2016, we really wanted to have this done this year, but we haven't had cooperation from the Royal Bay developer, which we, I don't mind saying, we're pretty frustrated with. That school is going to open in September. We feel that this is the time to put that connector in, but they're balking at that. So we think we'll be able to convince them by next year that it's necessary once they see the fact that the kids are using that anyway. So that's what that is. Again, you'll see a hyperlink in this when you see this document in the next version of it. I guess at some point they'll see the hyperlink. What there is here is this is a reconfiguration of the intersection of Dressler and Painter Road, because right now at that intersection, coming on Dressler and turning onto Painter, it's a free right turn or a free left turn, and coming the other way, it's a free right turn. And we can't just put in a stop sign or people will continue to blow through the stop sign. We need to actually do some physical changes to that geometry to make it a safe intersection once we have that pedestrian connector opened up. And you'll see what that looks like as it comes forward. The traffic signal controller replacement, the next item, is a controller that is past its useful life, and it's been causing some failures and some call-outs. And that's right outside the fire hall at Wishart and Metchosin Road. And so that's required to be replaced this year. And that pretty much does it. You got off the hook.
Funding sources?
The majority of the funding sources for those engineering projects, with a couple of exceptions, are gas tax. So the Welcome to Colwood sign was a statutory reserve. The Wilford Road extension was DCC's roads. The Kelly Road, Suk Road improvements, Emmett's already spoken to. That's a fairly complicated project, and it's definitely contingent on receiving both federal and provincial grants. And also, we need to do our homework on where our 1/3 would be coming from. So that one is not set in stone. Survey monuments are coming from tax. And let me just go over the page. And the traffic signal controller is tax. But the majority of that, and I'll sum it up when we're done this topic, is gas tax.
Thank you. All right, any questions on the engineering aspect? Yeah, then we'll do that.
Just a quick question on the Havenwood crosswalk signal. You were saying you've put that off. Are you hoping for a developer contribution, or that the development that's going in may bring power closer?
That's what I was hoping, is that the development that's going in may bring power closer. And regardless, even if we don't go that route, we still need to do a little more research on the solar power if we go that route.
And Emmett, I noticed that the bridge isn't in there any longer. Is it?
I believe we included that. I think we rolled that in with it.
Is it?
The Havenwood Park
The
Bridge?
Havenwood Park Bridge. We decided that it's one project.
Okay.
But I'll check into that. I want to make sure that we have that funding in there.
Yeah.
We want to do those at the same time.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we'll do the public works section. I'm sensitive of the time because we're rolling on to 3 hours, and we have this pergola discussion we need to have. So if we can kick it up a notch when we're looking at the descriptions, that would be great.
Okay. So, public works section, the crane is in progress. Crane truck that was ordered last year, just hasn't been delivered yet. And the Ford crew cab is not a crane. Please cross out crane there. That is a new. Actually, no, I'm not sure what that one is.
Fourth.
I know I gave you an email on that. Do you remember what it was?
I remember this one right here.
I don't know if we're in quite the same order there.
Yeah, we're not actually. Michael?
Sorry, you want...
We're kind of jumping around.
Sorry, okay, so we're doing the ones in the future as well. The electric Leaf is a replacement of the Chevy Blazer that is nominally a building car. The HVAC replacement at City Hall is the final replacement of those HVAC units, which have been giving us a lot of trouble. The units on the roof that heat and cool the place so perfectly. The equipment shed is because we keep a lot of equipment, small equipment, especially outside, that should really be in a shed, and we just don't have any room in the existing sheds. The pickup truck is, because of the tightening of WCB regulations on road signage, we need a dedicated truck for the guy that goes around and does all that, because right now we keep running into situations where either somebody else has to give him their pickup truck and stay at the yard, or he has to stay at the yard and not go out and do the signage. The Freightliner is the brine truck replacement. The haul all garbage truck is probably our most used vehicle, which is in need of replacement, and all this is from the plan, as far as I know, Andrea. And the pedestrian crossing solar equipment, that's existing equipment that is, quite frankly, substandard compared to the more recent equipment we've installed, and is giving us a lot of problems, so we scheduled the replacement of that. And then that Ford crew cab for $85,000. That's the one
It's to do with the sewer, the septic.
Well, the sucker truck is back over there in 2018. Oh, I see. Sorry, that 85 grand is 2014. My apologies. Yeah, that's the sucker truck. Again, it's a poor description on the line there. And whether we will actually replace that, then I think needs further discussion. I think we need to have a good comparison with what it would cost to bring in a contractor, rent one, those sorts of options, because $400,000 is a lot of money. Colwood Central Sewer expansion, that is the expansion that is paid for by borrowing under Colwood Central LAS. And we've split that into the actual sewer line in 2015 and the pump station completed in 2016. That's all funded by that borrowing, which is paid for from contributions from the LAS. The Matilda and Ilott Place sewer, that is funded partly by the city and partly by the residents on Ilott, and it's the fulfillment of a part of the deal on sewers that was done, and we had agreed to put individual pumps in all of the properties. Property owners came forward with a proposal to put one pump station in down at Matilda, make it a publicly owned pump station, and they offered $50,000 towards it, and council agreed to that, and they still haven't come up with the $50,000. The sewage treatment and resource, that one really is a piece of guesswork, because we don't really know where the sewage treatment thing is going from one day to the next. Takes some interesting twists and turns, but I can tell you that I just got the technical memo from the our consultants working on in-ground disposal. So at the next meeting, I'll be able to report a little bit more on that after I've read it. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea, funding?
Yes. So for the public works projects, vehicles are all coming from the fleet statutory reserve fleet replacement per that fleet replacement plan. And the pedestrian crossing, the solar one, that's tax. The septic sucking vehicle, sounds like the Red Green Show, $400,000 if we went there. That would be debt. And same with the sewer expansion is debt. And sewage treatment and resource, that would be gas tax. And the Matilda Ilott Place, that is somewhat conditional. In other words, it doesn't happen unless the neighbors, I believe, have to come up with their contribution. Is that right, Michael? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So in total, it represents a 0.575% tax increase.
Yes.
On $69,000.
If you'd like me to, I actually think the tangible capital assets in many ways are, I hope, more clearly understandable. I've given you the funding summary at the bottom. So much of these are basically tapping into our fleet replacement reserves. They're tapping into gas tax. They're tapping into debt. Okay, so, and for those who really like to do numbers, I've given you a bit more of a detail about what we mean on some of those. I don't expect you to go into those, but they, I think these ones are more achievable. I don't know about it. The one project that we've spent a lot of staff time on is the Central Colwood sewer expansion and then the Kelly Road expansion, because those are both very expensive projects, and we definitely need to get some help on the Kelly Road one, or it can't go ahead.
Questions? Councillor Rob.
Thank you. Councillor Rob, I like that better. I think I'm going to stick with that for now. I get the, if we're looking at sources of funding, 69,000 is coming from taxation, but what does the debt of 1 million and the leasing of 1.35 million, what does that represent from a taxation standpoint?
We need to do our debt analysis, which we haven't had a chance to. Now, interestingly enough, I just would remind Council, I believe that you have approved this $2.3 million previously, okay? So I'm assuming that must have been included in a prior budgets in terms of the debt servicing costs. I'm sorry, I don't have that right at hand, but it would have had to have been in there. Yeah, one of the things, well, it has to go on here as a tangible capital asset addition. What was I going to say about capital, though? Yeah.
In terms of the repayment of the debt, that is incorporated into the city's core budget, and depending on what the debt is servicing, that depends on how we repay it. So specifically Colwood Central, like Michael mentioned, that is repaid through the LAS parcel tax in that area. The debt that's incurred for any, in this case it's a sewer fleet item, so the annual debt payments would be funded through the sewer user fee. If it were debt for a general fleet item, it would just be through general taxation.
So I just want to clarify then, the 1 million and the 1.35 million, the debt servicing cost of that for 2015 is rolled into the 4.9% tax lift, correct?
Not necessarily 4.9% lift. As we mentioned at the beginning of tonight's meeting, we haven't yet analyzed the debt within the city's core budget, but we can highlight that next week, and it will either be funded through property taxation or it may be rolled into the LAS parcel tax, depending on what the debt is funding. So no, it's not necessarily the 4.9.
We don't yet have the final bottom line figured out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Jason. Since we're on a roll.
I prefer Dr. No myself.
Yeah.
But,
Dr. No.
I have a question about the international crane. It's shown as 185 in 2015, 175 in 2017, and 135 in 2018. Is this for a vehicle, or how do we spread the payments over that many years? It's capital.
The 185,000 is the cost of that crane truck. I actually don't know what the others are for. Not sure how they got in there, but Mike Skillings is probably the person I have to ask, and he was on holiday all last week. So I will be able to find out for the next meeting.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
Any further questions? Okay. What direction do you need, Andrea, moving forward on this?
Well, we've got some direction on the projects, which was prioritizing in that. I don't know if we need quite the same on this, because we've sort of covered the fact that the funding sources are a little bit more clearly laid out. The Kelly Road one is a concern, but either we get the additional funding or it doesn't go. So basically, this will come back when we get to our reserves. And the reserves analysis, I haven't got there yet because there's so many other things we have to do first. But the reserves will show you what kind of shape we're in. We get to our bottom line, we need to drive a certain amount of surplus to put back into our reserves. Because the way I'll present that is we'll start with our beginning balances in the reserves. All these items that we're planning on covering here, either as tangible capital assets or projects, will show as being funded from those reserves. And then we'll see how much we need to be replacing those reserves by, so that we're not in the negative 5 years out. So there's a tremendous amount of mathematical work out there, and it's like putting the pieces of a puzzle together. So I can tell you what we're looking at doing. I don't really need any direction at this point on the TCAs, because that will become quite obvious when we put the schedule together of the amount of money we're planning on pulling out of those reserves to fund all of this.
Okay, so perhaps just a motion to receive.
Yeah.
I'll move
PCAs.
receipt of the report.
Yeah. So we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried? Ooh. So a report in front of us from the Deputy Director of Engineering on the pergolas. Emmett.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it's just a memorandum. Didn't really do the report on it. So what we have here is this is something that was gifted. I should say the Royal BC Museum has gifted 2 pergolas designed by renowned West Coast architect John DeCastri and valued at $120,000 to our city. That's a 1% tax lift, by the way. I'm just kidding. See, I was paying attention, Andrew. Anyway, the stipulation is that the pergolas be removed from the site as soon as possible and that the city pay the cost of removal and transportation from the Royal BC Museum. So there was an email sent out to several local municipalities on February 1st, and we responded, arranged a meeting on site for the following day. When we met on site, there were representatives from Royal BC Museum, ourselves, a trucking company, and a welding company, whose name I didn't have as I was putting this memo together. At that meeting, various options were discussed for the disassembly and transportation of the pergolas to a suitable site in Colwood. And there was a fair, the way they were talking, there was going to need to be a fair amount of disassembly just for them to be able to get the items here. They're fairly tall. They're 15 feet tall by, at the widest point, 13 feet wide for the smaller one. For the larger one, it's actually quite a bit wider than that. So it was suggested at that meeting by the people that were talking about cutting it up that maybe we might want to contact Nickel Brothers House Movers to explore the possibilities. We did that and arranged to meet with them, and on February 10th we met on site with Nickel Brothers and same representatives from Royal BC Museum. A couple of days later, Nickel Brothers sent us an estimate for $16,800 to transport these 2 pergolas to the Public Works Yard at the City of Colwood. I know that they will honor that price or less to do it to another location in the other location that I emailed you about earlier. So should Council elect to approve the funding for Nickel Brothers to complete the move, we would require an additional $9,000, again, in addition to the $16,800 removal and transportation costs. This would be for on-site preparation, installation, and finishing the installation in terms of the concrete work that would be required to set it in place. So this total of $25,800 could be funded from the gas tax. The site selection, various staff have evaluated several options for the location. We considered Herm Williams Park, areas down at the lagoon, other parks. It's somewhat limited by the requirement that we have them removed by late February, which is ideally they'd like to start removing them this week or next week. So we're proposing that the pergolas be installed as a beautification feature in a high-profile area, either in the downtown core, and we were thinking the future site of the Resource Recovery Center on the edge of that, or in the new park at Royal Bay. So again, the downtown option would be adjacent to the Galloping Goose Trail at the Park and Ride property, just across the Goose from Denny's, which doesn't sound all that glamorous, but there you are. Given that this is the city's property, there are no negotiations required and site preparation could begin immediately. And we are connecting with the Royal Bay developer with the expectation that they will see the pergola as an exceptional amenity addition to the park space they are currently designing. The timing is perfect with the plannings in the works for the opening celebration in the fall of 2015 in conjunction with the school opening. So there's a couple of options there. And the options I present below is that that you could ask council to direct staff. I don't believe you can actually direct staff at this point. Can you? Okay. So let's change that wording slightly. That we acquire the pergolas from the Royal BC Museum, transport them by Nickel Brothers, and install them at the Park and Ride site at a cost of $25,800 to be funded from gas tax, or acquire the pergolas from the Royal BC Museum and have them cut up and stored at Public Works Yard at a cost of around $25,000, which was the estimate. That wouldn't include the reassembly. Or you could direct us to acquire the pergolas, transport them via Nickel Brothers to the Public Works Yard at a cost of $16,800 to be funded from gas tax. This option will necessitate a future move via Nickel Brothers at an additional cost, plus any site preparation charges. If we are successful in having them included as a feature in the Royal Bay site, it is possible that BCIMC will fund the move from the Public Works Yard in, and perhaps even fund the entire move retroactively, hard to say. Otherwise, the city would be responsible for these charges. And then the other option is just to say thanks, but we've decided not to proceed. So what the recommendation is that you approve, you give us early budget approval of option 1 at up to a cost of $25,800 to be funded from gas tax. Time is of the essence in this. They really want them out of there, and so I can't. We do need to have a decision or some sort of an approval to move ahead, however it is that we can do so, or just to say thanks, but we've decided against it.
Okay, thanks, Emmett. Will there be an additional funding line coming forward in terms of covering the site preparation and all that jazz?
That is included in the $25,800.
Okay.
That includes $9,000 in site prep.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have Councillor Robb, Councillor Day.
I'll just make the motion of option 1.
That we recommend to council
Yeah.
that we
So
acquire.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it? Direct.
No, it's in front of us.
Yeah,
It's
so
okay.
just
That,
one.
but it's a recommendation to council. I just
Yes.
want to be
Yeah.
clear.
I'm making that recommendation to council.
Okay,
But that's the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Discussion. Councillor Day.
Thank you. Just one of the places that we've had a lot of questions about, and especially anything that would offer some shade, is Colwood Creek Park. And there's a number of locations where the pergolas might be a very welcome addition, perhaps at the Cecil Blog entrance or even at the Sunridge Valley entrance as an additional, they would provide some shade, they would give some structure. So just a suggestion that might be an area that where they, equally should be great if Royal Bay would put them in there, but.
Through the chair, there are two factors here. One, there are two pieces. We could install one in one place and one in the other. Two, I could get the price from Nickel Brothers to see if there's any change in moving it from one to the other. And I think you could, if I had an indication that you were going with one or the other, we could probably give them the go-ahead to move, negotiate the change in price, and then have you make that decision at council. So we could bring you more information and have a discussion between now and then. We could get the ball rolling now, Pat, if that's allowed, and get the and make that final decision at the council meeting. It's a possibility.
So do we want to, Mayor Hamilton? Oh, sorry, Councillor Day. Yeah.
No, just very briefly follow up, just to remind council that I'm sure I don't have to remind the chair that sometimes the residents nearby Colwood Creek Park are, they like to be consulted about changes in the park. Right. And I think that's a good thing. I think this would be well received, especially given the request for a little bit of additional shade. If we put a bench underneath the pergola or something, it would certainly be nice. But just to draw council's attention to that idea as well.
Hey, Mayor Hamilton.
Talk about the benches. Would those things come with the benches that are presently?
No, that would be part of the additional $9,000. There have to be some benches that are put inside them.
If they give us those benches, we'll just move them along.
They're doing a lot for us on this one.
Councillor, oh, sorry.
I guess the ask, though, needs to be, because, although we're just giving the go-ahead to either go with this or not, what's the process of being able to early approve a lump sum from that between you and our Director of Finance here? how do we manage that?
Well, this is just an advisory body, so you could still only do a
Oh, no, I
recommendation
know.
to
Yep, we're going
council.
to council with it. But
So you could move forward with a recommendation that you've already made, but you could have staff doing some more of that research and homework and reporting at the same council meeting. And at least at the council level, if there's a bit of a change in plan or budget requirement, you can address it directly at the council meeting.
But in that we're still a week away from that, and we might have to move quicker in a week.
Then you'd have to call a special council meeting because you can't do it at the committee level.
No, I know, but I'm just saying it, like, do we can otherwise make that work?
So I was just
there?
asking Jen what you've done in years past, because one of the ways that it can be covered is that you're approving a 5-year financial plan. Now, sometimes if it was a project, let's say that was in there in the past years, and it applies to the future years, and we haven't got that budget passed yet, usually we can say it's in the 5-year plan. So we look at it as a big envelope, whatever's in that 5-year plan, even though it may be in a future year and you want to move it up. Now, this is obviously not in there, but you can also say that you have approved a great deal of gas tax expenditures. So if you wanted, you could say that this is a gas tax expenditure, and we're basically going to be changing the use of the pre-approved gas tax monies for this particular project. I don't have an easy answer on that.
I know, and I'm just sensing an urgency from our Deputy Director of Engineering here to say that, you know, there's a timeline attached to these folks. It is a provincial renovation project that they're doing there, and they've got some fairly strict timelines. And, you know, I think I and the rest of the council are sticklers for the details of dotting I's and crossing T's, and don't want to get, you know, out there on the end of the diving board, you know. So best way forward that's going to cover us with an intent to take before council. I mean, recommendation thereof, and you know.
Okay, well, why don't you say that, Jen? Jen, she needs to speak up here. She has an idea.
The other alternative is you can simply give early approval. So this would be a new 2015 capital expenditure, and you can just give early approval as early as perhaps council on the 23rd. I don't know.
Yeah, but I guess the sense is that there was the hope that we could give the approval like tonight to get it done, but or intent of.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tonight council could, or a committee rather, could endorse this, could give a recommendation to council, and hopefully you don't change your minds.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd like to simplify it. I don't want to open up the Colwood Creek Park thing because, as you said, they like to be consulted. If we go down that path, we might be sunk. We could be able to move one of these in the future. We may end up, and what I'd like to do is between now and on the Monday, come up with whether or not we're going to bring them and store them in Public Works Yard or whether we're going to install them somewhere. So what I'm asking you for right now is to sort of give me an indication that you would be okay with putting the $25,800, or you would recommend that to council, and that in the meantime I will give them that indicator saying, you know what, I can't give you a yes right now, but they were unanimous in proceeding with that, but they can't give a yes right now. They can only give a yes on Monday. And then on Monday I come back and I say, I give you two choices. Either we do what we said and take it and put it by the Galloping Goose Trail, or we store it in the Public Works Yard, or if a better idea comes along in the meantime and we can work it out, we do that. So if I get an indicator of that, that's exactly what I will take, an indicator.
Okay, that's the best we can do tonight.
Sorry, one more thing if I could. I will go to the point of scheduling it out with Nickel Brothers and tell them exactly where we're at as well. Okay. So everybody knows the honest truth of where we are.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed?
Unanimous.
Carried? And did everyone know we actually have a John DeCastri house in Colwood?
I did not know that.
On Goldstream Avenue. It's actually currently being renovated. Yes, and I looked after his brother. feel way back when. Yes. Well, I am that too. Yeah, final item, summary of reserves and deferred revenue.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I think I'm starting to fade a little here. There's a lot of numbers, so I think we can probably defer that with your approval because we still have to roll up the statutory reserves. I provided this mainly for some information this evening, and if there's one thing I'd like you to look at, it's the top section is development cost charges, and that first couple of columns shows you our actual balance for 2013 and then 2014. And then going forward, those are our projections before we start, in some cases, restocking them. The deferred gas tax is under other, and this is important because you had $1.3 million in there at the end of last year, and as our engineer Michael had said earlier, we were concerned that we might have to try and spend it all last year, which is why you did see an awful lot of projects piled up. So we haven't done all of that work. We're now at $1.8 million, and you can see that we are guaranteed, I believe it's $700,000 approximately each year in new gas tax monies, and we've subtracted out of here all those other projects that you saw us talking about this evening. And I thought this might give you some comfort that at the end of 2015, if we do all of those projects that are funded from gas tax with that steady infusion of 700,000, we're actually up a little bit to 2.3 million. So this is just more to give you a bit of an idea of how this can work, okay? When we can manage to find, now this isn't our money coming in, this is the government's, but this is the kind of thinking I want you to be looking at when we start talking about fleet replacement reserves, and we have to look at, we know how much we're going to take out, but then that will drive the other side of the equation. How much do we have to put back in to kind of keep some equilibrium?
Una, I'm glad to see the sidewalk fund is listed in there because that was a bit of a bone of contention over the last couple of years. So, thank you.
And I also picked our planner's brain a little bit and put him on the spot because it was like, well, how would I know? And I said, well, Ian, you'd know better than I do on some of this crystal ball gazing exercise, because he had a very good spreadsheet actually, which we looked at, and we were very conservative looking at the amount of money that might be coming in right at the very bottom there in terms of your community amenities fund, looking at $320,000 per year, and the affordable housing reserve based on some of the projects that he has listed of $80,000 a year. And we also know that there's, and Chief Carey, you can step in if we've got this wrong, but we were showing a $150,000 addition to the fire hall replacement reserve from the Pacific Landing project. So I wanted to sort of end on a bit of hope and optimism here in terms of, you know, as we see some development, how that can drive monies, and also going forward, staff are talking about being thoughtful in terms of their analysis of the user fees that we charge to ensure that we're not ahead of other municipalities, but also sort of keeping up, because that's another source of revenue other than taxation. Okay?
Thank you. I think I had Mayor Hamilton and then Councillor Day. Carol?
I just wanted, like, when you spoke to the end of the year 2015 balance of the deferred gas tax, you said 2.3. Mine says 1.9. I just want to.
At the very end, 2019.
Or are you talking about 2019?
At the end of 2019.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I just didn't want to. I wanted to know if we were jumping up that quick. It was good.
No.
I was with you on that one. The other thing I just wanted to mention and just flag for maybe the Parks Committee to consider, or planning to maybe assist the Parks Committee with, and that is that we've had pretty static amount in the Parkland Acquisition Fund for several, well, at least, 8 years that I can think of, ever since we paid off the acquisition of Havenwood Park. And I'm just wondering if staff could give us some more information on when and how we might use that fund to acquire some green space in the city of Colwood. There's been a couple of properties recently gone for development where neighborhoods have been concerned. I've certainly had quite a few phone calls about clear cut and issues, and maybe there's some way to look at what we're going to do with that parkland acquisition monies, because we can't use it for something else. And I don't see why we would keep it on the books for forever, because probably the price of land is going up faster than the interest we're making on the money.
Thank you. Oh, come on. It's almost 9. Get out of here by 9.
Looking at the deferred gas tax, when does that gas tax expire? Because what I'm concerned about and what I'm confused about is if we're increasing it by $750,000 a year and then we're spending it, but at 2019 we still have $2.2 million of gas tax that's available. Mm-hmm. When does that money theoretically expire, and should we not be trying to spend that money and instead of using DCCs be using gas tax?
I think there was more than one question in there, so let me
He just wouldn't shut up.
just think about what you asked me there. Basically, the terms of the program are broader, so we can use it for more things. Yeah. So you had mentioned earlier about probably spending it instead of road DCCs, I believe, was that one of the items there. So we could certainly look at that unless our engineer had a specific reason for using them. So yes, we could do that. What I find is when we do budgets up, usually our clarity is best in the first year of the budget, and it tends to get a little fuzzier as we go further out. And it's not like we're not going to have demand for gas tax, Councillor Rob Martin. We will have demand. It's just that, as we go forward, we'll think up some more wonderful projects, I'm sure of it, in years 2 and 3. I'm actually quite happy to see it building slightly rather than going downhill, because that demand will always continue to rise.
I'm not concerned about our demands. I'm concerned that the gas tax, for example, was supposed to expire in 2014, and the government renewed it, right? And so there is an expiry date on when this gas tax needs to be used by. Is that not correct? Or am I wrong again?
What I would suggest, just so we can cut this short a little bit, is we're referring this to the next meeting anyways, right? So
we can answer very quickly.
I think Jen can answer that.
Because if we're going to rehash this discussion,
the program's been extended to 2024, and our auditors are currently looking into whether or not there is actually a requirement to repay any of the funding, because they've had discussion with other municipalities and they don't believe there is a requirement to repay the funding. So.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate staff and them giving me an answer.
So we have a motion to refer the deferred revenue to the next meeting. Any discussion? Moved by Carol. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next meeting is Wednesday, February 25th, where filet mignon will be served for dinner. And Rob's gonna barbecue. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Lilha. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.